All right, good evening, everybody. Sego, Ani, Buju, Endio, Wachaya, Kwekwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share this space now and walk side by side into the future. So good evening, everybody. We were just meeting in committee of the whole closed meeting. We discussed a couple of items with respect to federal grant funding to support health innovation cluster and also affordable housing. So I will ask for a motion to rise without reporting, please.
Moved by Councillor Boehm, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that Council rise from the committee of the whole closed meeting without reporting.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay, next we'll look to approve the addeds. We have a number of additional delegations. We have a motion of congratulations, and we have some amendments to new motion number 2. Can I have a mover for the addeds, please? Moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we have no presentations this evening, but we do have a number of delegations. Now, as per our procedural rules, we have 3 delegations on our agenda. On the addeds, we have an additional 6. Once we have run through the first 3 on the agenda, then I will ask for motions of council to approve the additional 6 delegations. So our first delegation this evening is Jillian Wilson, will appear before council to speak to clause 1, subsection 2 of report number 88 received from Heritage Kingston with respect to approval of application for a heritage permit 15 McDonald Avenue. And just a reminder to all of our delegations that you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Patterson and members of council. My name is Jillian Wilson, and I'm here to represent Alexander Wilson Architect, Heritage Downtowns, and the developer Alex Brogance regarding the renovation of the rectory of the Church of the Good Thief in Portsmouth Village, including the replacement of the existing windows. Next slide, please. The developer has invested an enormous amount of money on the project, including repointing the limestone and brick, retiling the slate roof, and restabilizing and waterproofing the foundations. One chimney was entirely reconstructed as it was in danger of complete structural failure. Next slide, please. Approval has already been received to renovate the existing garage into a 2-story addition. Next slide. The existing windows are in poor condition. Many are inoperable and do not meet code requirements for air leakage and thermal and acoustic isolation. Because the windows were not part of the original heritage designation, the developer ordered $70,000 of new replacement windows, which closely match the appearance of the original windows. After the windows arrived on site, Heritage Kingston decided that the original windows should have been part of the heritage designation and that all the windows should be refurbished. Next slide, please. Through consultation with city staff and some members of the Heritage Kingston, a compromise was proposed: retain and repair the 4 large decorative arched windows and replace the remaining windows. This compromise is supported by city staff and was initially accepted by Heritage Kingston. However, they rescinded the motion and made a new proposal, which was accepted without discussion of the community. Next slide, please. For the windows being retained, all interior hardware will be removed and cleaned, and the windows will be stripped, sanded, filled, primed, and painted. To improve energy efficiency and decrease street noise, inside each window a storm will be installed, which will make the windows inoperable. The ground floor apartment will be most impacted, as it has 3 of the 4 windows to be retained. Next slide, please. The other 30 windows are much simpler arch windows. We propose to replace them with the new solid vinyl windows. Next slide, please. We ask that you consider this proposal on its multitude of factors, including environmental, safety, economic, comfort, aesthetic, procedural. The city has already exceeded the 90-day timeline specified under the Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and so it is deemed that council has already consented to this application. Feasibility, policy, as it addresses Kingston's housing shortage, and heritage. Next slide, please. In conclusion, we are asking council not to accept Heritage Kingston's motion to vote for the original compromise recommendation of the city to restore the 4 most significant windows and replace the remainder with modern, energy efficient windows of a similar appearance. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I just want to be sure. I think the second last slide showed a window leaning up against the building. Is that the proposed vinyl windows?
Yes, that is the proposed vinyl window. It's not that window, but it is one of the windows that is proposed.
Okay, so my second question is, would the ones that are proposed to be changed to vinyl all mimic the shape of the existing windows?
Yes, they would mimic the shape, and they would have the muntin bars where they exist, but not where they don't.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. We'll move to our second delegation this evening. Paul Purvis will appear before council to speak to clause 2, subsection 1 of report number 88, received from Heritage Kingston with respect to approval of application for heritage permit 98 Clergy Street East.
Hello, am I there?
You are, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So in regards to 98 Clergy, I guess, do you have the, yes, you do. 98 Clergy is part of a 7-row housing from 1874. You can go to the next slide. Again, like I said, 1874. I don't think I have too much more to say than that. The front structure of the building has some really good architecture on it in the stonework and the limestone. The rear of the building is, how do I say it? More than this, much more than a mess on all of the units down there. There's been, so what we're planning to do is upgrade, or not upgrade, but redo all the windows, redo all the doors in their original. So we're building them mortise and tenon exactly as they would have been built back in 1874. Next slide, please. Yeah, it is an existing 4-unit. Right now, though, with the ceilings in the upper level, there is, like, in the stair area right now, there is less than 6 feet. It's about 5'6" for head clearances in that area. It's just not reasonable to consider that reasonable living space in, I would say, in these terms now. What we're doing is we're trying to do the least modification, but make it so it's a reasonable living space. Next slide, please. So we are doing everything within our power, and in talking with the planner, we have told him that we will follow any recommendations by Heritage when it comes to material types, things like that. Obviously, they have more expertise. I can't actually tell you, but we intended to use wood siding on the new dormer. Besides that, there really wouldn't be too much change. Next slide. As you can see, this is the existing elevations right now. We are actually having Bell and Cogeco, the owner is, remove all those unsightly wires that run along the back. If we can go ahead with this plan, we are going to be able to get rid of that one flight of pressure treated stairs up on the top section there and that landing area. Next slide, please. These are existing dormers that you can see on other units right now. Next slide, please. Again, this is 2 more units. They have full dormers on the back portions. Next slide, please. This is what we're proposing. The front elevations are not changing at all. This is what the rear elevation is going to be changing to. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the dormers that are currently on these units. As you can see, it's pretty much laden with dormers right now. At least 4 of them are full-size dormers spanning the full width of each of the units. Next slide, please. This is again outlining how many existing dormers there are on these units right now and what we're proposing for the dormer on the on our unit. Next slide, please. So, you know, the benefits to this really are to make it a living space that somebody can actually live in. Right now, with the slope ceilings in there, we're able to sort of make the front into the bedroom area, but actually to have a kitchen and any sort of living space in the back area, it's really just not even suited to that at all. I don't know, I shouldn't say, I don't know what they thought in 1874 when they built something like this, but obviously they believed in dormers because there's dormers all over the place. But I don't know why they would have had such low slope ceilings in those areas. The exterior finishes, and like the planner said that we worked with, he is quite happy with the effort we're putting in to bring this back to its original looks. We have re-stripped the front doors. We have removed.
So you have 30 seconds left.
So, okay. So I think that's really it. Just to say that I don't think I set my last slide. Yes. So basically, our intent is to put it into original condition as much as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We will now move to delegation number 3. Pavna Pharma, President and CEO of United Way KFL&A, will appear before council to speak to clause 2 of report number 86 received from the Chief Administrative Officer with respect to the Lionhearts meal program.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think I have a slide deck that they'll start. So firstly, I wanted to really acknowledge that City Council has established food security as one of your strategic priorities, and that's a really important issue. So I thought I'd give you a background of the food network and the system in the community, just so everyone, council and the community had a sense of it. So we'll go to the next slide. So our food security system in Kingston and area is all about the whole network. So it's about food production, growing and harvesting local produce, food skills and learning, helping people use food appropriately, and food distribution, which includes meal programs, and most recently enhanced hampers and food boxes. The next slide will tell you about the impact of the pandemic. I'm sure you've heard, and we've heard it right across the country from all my colleagues, food has been an incredibly important issue throughout the country and throughout this community. We're talking about the region. So in the region, we've gone up from about 500 to 600 meals a week to 1,400 to 1,800 meals a day, 7 days a week. Plus, we're distributing, and we as the whole food network system are distributing hampers, food boxes, meals on wheels. So I just thought I'd share with you some of those. I cannot say enough about the network of agency staff who've made this happen, how they've adapted so quickly overnight, literally from March 16th to March 17th, to create new ways to deliver food. The funders who've allowed a flexible funding, including some funding from the province, from the federal, the Community Foundation, the United Way, the city, we've all kind of pitched in to make sure we meet the demands, and recognizing that these are essential services. Without these programs, many people could not have made it through the pandemic. The next slide will talk about the food production. So Robinson Community Gardens is a farm, as is the Odessa Community Gardens. They've been producing food And right across, local farmers donate food, community gardens across Kingston. So this is a really important part of what we do in Kingston and area. There's also a significant effort around diverting food from landfill and distributing reclaimed and fresh food from farmers, restaurants, gardens. Lionhearts, Loving Spoonful, and many others are working on this. The next one we'll talk a bit about food skills, and next slide, please, is about how food is connected, a sense of community and belonging, and the demonstration of cooking, the community kitchens, helping people to how to use good food box contents. Loving Spoonful, Kingston Community Health Centers, they're all working, as are a number of agencies, on how we can help people use food. This is an area where I think we can develop a little more in our community, but there's some great programs that have started. The next one is around food distribution. We have seen a huge increase in this area. We are food sharing a project and Isthmus are providing baskets, hampers, boxes to families who would otherwise get food at schools or over the weekend. It's really grown significantly with the pandemic. With schools open, you can certainly give snacks and healthy food, but it's not meals. So the hampers and the boxes will supplement that. We've also identified food security issues with post-secondary. So St. Lawrence College and Queen's University, we're supporting food boxes to help those who are struggling to make ends meet. And then, of course, the food bank, St. Vincent de Paul, Salvation Army, everyone has been giving out food pretty consistently throughout the pandemic with waves of huge increases and then flattening a bit. KCHC, Kingston Community Health Centers, gives good food boxes, and we've subsidized a large number of these. Over 250 are subsidized, so people can actually get these at no cost. We've discovered a number of seniors on low income who need these food boxes. Right now, we're delivering about 400 food boxes just within Kingston every month. And then, of course, there are seniors, custom meals, Meals on Wheels that go around town. Next slide, please. This is just a quick, and we'll skim through this because this hasn't been updated, but it is being updated by the city as we speak. We'll go to the next slide. For the winter, which is a serious issue, and I think that's why it's on your agenda today, Martha's Table has, with funding, started an outside heated patio so people can wait for their takeout meals. Lunch by George is going to serve 30 people indoors, and others will still come by and get takeout. I just wanted to mention Martha's Table is also starting a delivery program next month. So again, very much appreciated with how they've adapted. And St. Vincent de Paul is really, really full. They have a small space, as you know, so they'll focus on takeout. The next slide will talk about something for the future, which I'll leave with you and I'll come back another day. But I just wanted to endorse, and I'll go to the next slide, which is your Lionhearts proposal today. Cannot say enough about how we could not have managed all this without Lionhearts. The amount of meals they're providing, this is a really critical, important program for our community. And I know that council has received an excellent report from staff. And I really wanted to make sure that this is something that is that everyone knew that this is critical for our food system. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Farba. Are there any questions from council? Okay. Again, thank you very much. And with that, we will move on to our next set of delegations. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to, so we've added a number of them, but we need a formal motion of council to allow additional delegations to speak. So I will just read through them. So first, moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Neal, that our procedural bylaw be amended or waived rather to allow Simon Barron to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Neal, that our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Leah Westlake to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Neal, that our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Jonathan Rose to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Neal, that our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Wendy Hewitt to speak to new motion number 2 with respect to movie theaters. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Neal, that our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Bruce Downey to speak to clause 3, subsection 1 of report number 88 from Heritage Kingston with respect to the application for Heritage Permit 85 King Street East and 46 Simcoe Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And then finally, moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Greg Tilson to speak to new motion number 2 with respect to movie theaters. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. So now we have an additional 6 delegations on our agenda. So we will move through them one at a time. First, we will invite Simon Barron to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Thanks. So I want to thank you for letting me speak on and have the opportunity to speak about my experience with the Yes campaign during the 2018 ranked ballot referendum. After the city announced the referendum, I was part of a grassroots organization that formed to inform voters about the benefits of about the referendum and the benefits of ranked ballot. Benefits such as more choice by allowing more people to run, eliminating strategic voting, and one that's important to me is no negative campaigning, a much more positive campaign during an election. To inform voters, we organized information booths across the city at different community events, such as Pride, the Sidewalk Sale, the Skeleton Music Park Festival. These allowed us the opportunity to talk one-on-one with individuals about the referendum and ranked ballots. Early on, most people didn't know about the referendum or what ranked ballots were at all. And so it was nice just to be able to talk to people about politics without any background thoughts about what the issue was already. As more people learned about ranked ballots, more people wanted to become more informed and about the referendum. Many groups across the city started asking us to present. So we presented to groups such as community groups such as Rotary and Lions Club. We presented to business groups such as the Chamber. We presented to union and labor groups such as the OSSTF and the Kingston District Labor Council. So more and more people were becoming informed. We also, one of the highlights was a large information session that we held at the Spire called Ranked Ballads, with Sarah Harmer doing music and Dave Meslin of Unlocked Democracy talking about ranked ballots. We had over 200 people come out on a very rainy evening to learn about this. And after hearing the presentation, many signed up to volunteer for the campaign at that point. For the final weekend, we had a big push where we had over 20, we had all our volunteers out and we put door hangers on over 20,000 residences in Kingston. We tried to spread the word to as many people in Kingston as possible that the referendum was happening and what ranked ballots were. The campaign was a wonderful process to be a part of. I got to meet tons of people across Kingston of all political stripes, new to politics, old to politics, across all of Kingston that I wouldn't have met without the campaign. I'm going to say before the referendum, I really wanted the council just to implement ranked ballots right away without a referendum, but I have to say it was an incredible process and I'm really glad they did because it meant that Kingston was informed and now feels ownership of the process. When it came time to vote, the people in Kingston were fully informed, both because of city-led outreach and the grassroots community outreach. Okay, the city came out in large numbers and voted, and 63% said yes to ranked ballots. This is a historic vote for Kingston That day, along with Cambridge, we were the first 2 cities in Canada to vote for changing to ranked ballots. Other communities now look to Kingston as a leader to ask, what our process was. And we present a model other than London's of just going ahead and doing it, but asking the citizens of the community to have a say. And now Kingston's at the forefront of this movement as it is municipalities choosing what type of election they want to have is, being challenged by the provincial government. I want to thank Council for embracing the referendum result and taking steps to go towards ranked ballots, and encourage you to continue to show your support for those that voted, the 63% that voted for ranked ballots, by voting for this motion today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from Council? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to our next delegation this evening. We will invite Leah Westlake to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. Unfortunately, Ms. Westlake, we can't hear you. We're just working on the. Okay, I think this is our first ever pre-recorded delegation, so who knew? Okay. Okay, so I've just been informed by the clerks, if we can go to the next delegation, I think just to work out a technical detail, so we'll do that. So at this point, I will move and allow Jonathan Rose to speak to new motion number 1 with respect to ranked ballots. Mr. Rose, you have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Your Worship, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I am an associate professor of political studies at Queen's, and the sign behind me wasn't just put up for today. It's actually, this is my first year politics classroom, and I take voting really seriously. And I think we should be all reminded of the importance that voting has in a democracy. So today, of course, as we all have one eye south of the border and scrolling madly about what the results will be like, I think voting matters even more than ever. In Canada, we know as political scientists who do this research that voting has been on decline, and it's been on a decline as well in virtually all Western industrialized democracies. In the last federal election, it was 68%, and that was celebrated because it was seen as much higher than the previous several elections. And I think when you have 68%, which means you have 32% of citizens not participating, it says that something is wrong in our democracy. And as all of you know, sitting around this virtual horseshoe, voting at the municipal level is even lower. In the last couple municipal elections here in Kingston, the average was around 40%. So this all suggests that there's a problem. So what can be done? And this council, or this city, I should say, took the bull by its horns and actually used the motto of innovation and where innovation thrives by changing the way we think about how citizens make choices at the municipal level. And as Simon alluded to, this was a real groundbreaking effort and one that had huge repercussions, not just in Ontario, but around the country. We also recognize that voting is not a partisan issue. And that's why the ranked ballot referendum had support from those people on the right and those people on the left as well. We also know from research around the world that countries that use a ballot where you can make choices, voting turnout tends to be higher. So one of the solutions to our ailing and declining voter turnout might be to rethink the way we approach ballots. After all, I think it's just common sense that when we go to a restaurant, we have more choices in our meal than when we choose our mayor or our councillors. So it's as simple as when we go to a restaurant is saying, if you don't have the fish, I'll have the chicken. And I don't know why it is seen as difficult at the municipal level. It's as simple, straightforward, and intuitive as that. We also know that the change in electoral system affects candidates who choose to run. It changes their strategy from one of attacking their opponents to one of embracing and forming alliances and coalitions with others. It also changes the tenor and temper of a campaign to one being more positive. After all, you may need your opponent's support on the second ballot. The research in Australia, where it's been used the longest, suggests that voters really like this system of ranked ballots. Virtually all voters use the ranking, and it has an impact in between 5 and 8% of the outcomes. In other words, it changes the plurality choice on the first outcome 5 to 7% of the time. In London, Ontario, where it was used in 2018, it was enthusiastically embraced. 70% of Londoners used it, which is tremendous. You have to remember that many candidates told their supporters not to rank, but just to choose one candidate. What does that tell us? It tells us that voters understand the way in which this system works and understand the positive benefits it could have. Incidentally, 50% of the council was elected on the first count, but a whole 50% was elected on the subsequent counts. So I hope that City Council passes this motion urging that the Ontario government rethink its policy to rescind ranked ballots. The proposed change will have huge effect on the 20,000 people who supported it here, and will effectively tell those voters in that referendum that their voice doesn't matter. And aside from the harm this does to municipal autonomy, I think it's sorry?
Go ahead, sorry, I just wanted to give you a 30-second warning.
Thank you. It's worrisome because it adds to the cynicism that citizens have for all politicians of all political stripe. So to put it another way, repealing Kingston's ability to use ranked ballots in the next election is much more than ballots. It's really around how governments treat citizens when they ask their opinions. So I hope that whatever your thoughts are, you are able to convey to the provincial government that here in Kingston, citizens' voices matter. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Neal.
Thank you. And hello, Dr. Rose. A couple of quick questions. I'll bundle them together. First of all, the Premier used his extraordinary emergency powers under the COVID. Can you see a link between this and COVID? I've been kind of puzzling over that. And the other thing is, I'm curious about his other rationale was that this is a very difficult kind of process and that would confuse people. I think most Kingstonians can count to 3, but I'm just wondering if you could comment on those 2 questions.
Yeah, so the first one, I have no insight into the Premier's intentions, and I too was puzzled when he said that repealing this was related to COVID. I don't see the connection, nor do I see the connection, I might add, between the expense, and perhaps we can get into that in further questions. On your second one, sorry, your second question was?
Regarding the complexity.
Around the difficulty, absolutely not. I mean, I raised the restaurant example because we do this all the time. We make choices all the time, and it's odd that anyone would say that making a choice through ranked ballots is difficult, because it isn't.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you, thank you, Dr. Rose. I'm wondering if you know of any other examples of municipalities or actually any level of jurisdiction that has held a referendum on this issue or something similar to, and if so, what were the results? Did the government accept the results of the referendum or not?
On the municipal level, the City of London, UK, had a referendum some time ago, I don't know when, to elect the mayor, and that was adopted. There may be other places, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much. At this point, we're going to circle back to the previous delegation. I think we've worked out the technical issues. So with that, we will invite Leah Wesley to speak to new motion number 1.
So good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for letting me present this way. My name is Lee Westlake, and I am a coordinating member of Fair Vote Kingston. Fair Vote Kingston works to support the work of Fair Vote Canada in advocating for a more fair and more proportional voting system. And I'm here tonight to speak towards your motion about ranked ballots. And I'd like to say 3 things. Firstly, electoral reform is not new in this country. We are constantly working to make our election processes better and more fair. You know, in the past, we've worked to include men who don't own property. We've worked to include women. We've worked to include Indigenous people. We're constantly working to make how we vote reflect our whole society. Secondly, electoral reform has rich and deep roots in Kingston. Some of you may remember the Ontario Citizens Assembly. The government of the day tasked a group of citizens to review first past the post and recommend a change. And it was Kingston's George Thompson who chaired the assembly, Kingston's Jonathan Rose who led the citizens through the learning phase of that process. And when the citizens recommended that we should move away from first past the post to a proportional system, very high profile Kingstonians of all stripes supported their recommendation. Hugh Segal for the Conservatives, John Garretson for the Liberals, Rick Downs, who was the candidate for the NDP at the time, and Bridget Doherty, the candidate for the Green Party at the time. We in Kingston have been more interested and more in favor of changing electoral systems than the province as a whole. And most recently, we actually moved to change it, as you know, municipally. Kingston Council wisely let Kingstonians decide whether we would use first past the post or ranked ballots to choose our municipal politicians. The referendum won by 63%, and it made Kingston the first municipality in the country to actually vote to change away from first past the post. A system that, in fact, needed and needs to be changed. It is a system that distorts the way we vote. It's a system that creates negative campaigns, and it is a system that can elect somebody with as little as 27% of the vote. So Kingston spoke, and you listened, which was fabulous. Enter Doug Ford. Under the guise of COVID relief, he has repealed our right as a city to choose how we elect our politicians. And in doing so, he has set democracy back. So I would like to urge you as a council to do whatever you can and start by supporting this motion to tell him that this is unacceptable. He has not even let MPPs kind of debate this uniquely by burying it in the COVID relief bill. Regardless, I would say, on your views on ranked ballots, the tool of a local referendum has been challenged for you. And I think that is a serious issue as well. So I have no doubt that you will support this motion and do whatever you can to make sure Kingston's voice has been heard. Thank you for all the work you do. Good night.
Okay, with that, we will move to our next delegation on our agenda. we will invite Wendy Hewitt to speak to new motion number 2 to movie theaters.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm the owner of the Screening Room Movie Theater on Princess Street. As you can imagine, our business has been pretty hard hit by the pandemic. Attendance is down about 75 to 80%. And of course, even though we're a piece of cultural infrastructure, I think we have something in common with the public library or the Grand Theater or any kind of, cultural arts venue. We are, 100% reliant on sales for all of our revenue. It's, ticket sales, food sales, venue rental income from the dozens of local organizations that rent our theater, including the 2 big film festivals in town. And so, of course, if attendance is down 75 to 80%, our revenue's down the same proportion. And so it means that we don't have the same kind of cushion or continuity that I think other cultural spaces in the city have. Now, we have been beneficiaries of the federal wage subsidy and some telefilm funding and some other federal programs, but we are still hemorrhaging, thousands and thousands of dollars a month. And I think there is some potential, and there is some room for maybe some minor growth, particularly maybe through the winter. The data is pretty compelling that movie theaters are actually a comparatively safe indoor entertainment option through this pandemic. There's been no, actually globally, nobody can find any public record of there being any case of COVID-19 transmission taking place in a movie theater, let alone any outbreaks. In Ontario, there's been no requests for contact tracing from any movie theater, even though we are doing complete contact tracing. So we are, considered a safer option than going to a restaurant or even going to church, actually. I could go into the reasons for that. But anyways, yeah, we are definitely suffering, and I really don't see it I don't see us becoming profitable again until it's mainstream and people are comfortable sitting in dark indoor spaces with strangers again. And so I imagine that sometime after there's a vaccine, and I think it will actually be a long road for us to rebuild, rebuild our attendance. And of course, too, film makers and film distributors, they're just not, there's this chicken and the egg problem where the people who make films are not giving them theatrical releases because the theatrical market isn't there. And instead, a lot of films are being sent straight to video on demand, to streaming platforms. I don't think this will happen, but there's rumors that Netflix might buy the new James Bond movie so that it will bypass movie theaters altogether and become basically a TV movie. And this, this thing where movies basically are completely bypassing the theatrical channels and going straight to people's homes, this is totally new for the movie theater industry. Like in 1818, that was not something that movie theaters had to reckon with. And this industry, the movie theater business, which is over 100 years old, there's absolutely no precedent for the bottom just completely dropping out on movie-going culture. Another thing I just wanted to draw attention to that's, I think, specific about movie theaters is that we are really unusual physical spaces. If a movie theater goes out of business, historically, once a movie theater closes, it doesn't reopen under new ownership. It's not like a restaurant where one restaurant goes out of business and then a new one can take over the space. There's various reasons why it's hard for a new cinema exhibitor to just start up. Normally, a cinema space, goes out, the tenant goes out of business, the space will maybe sit derelict for a while, be hard for there to be a new tenant. Maybe it gets redeveloped and turned into condos. That's common as well. So if you lose a theater business, often it doesn't come back. You can look to Halifax as an example of that. So I think I'll just wrap it up there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Neal.
Thanks, Wendy. A couple of questions, either through the federal government plan or through your local landlord. Have you had any kind of forgiveness on your rent or an allowance to pay later?
So we did not benefit from the rent assistance program, the very controversial rent assistance program, which we're not allowed to apply for directly as a tenant. The landlord must apply for that. And you must have their cooperation and their financial participation. So we have not benefited from that program.
And your landlord didn't support that request, or?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Ewell, my question is regarding, first part is regarding the historical appearance of your theater. I remember what happened, but if you could maybe tell us and the folks watching, there was once movie theaters at the location of two current nightclubs near Division and Princess, and they both closed down within a few years of each other, I believe. And then the screening room began. If you could just tell us a little bit about the history of that. It's been quite some time, and you've been essentially the only downtown movie theater for most of your existence. If you could just tell us that history.
Yeah, just add, Stages and the Ale House were once movie theaters. Trailhead, I think that location was a movie theater. I think at one point, probably in the 20s or 30s, there were 5 or 6 large movie houses all along Princess Street. And yeah, the screening room opened at Superflix and Food in the late 90s. Now, one thing I'll say is that it bears, there's no connection between it and the Princess Court Theater, which was, like a not-for-profit theater that ran, I guess, where the above where the Mekong Vietnamese restaurant currently is. The Princess Court Theater was a not-for-profit theater that specialized in art house films, foreign films. They would do dinner and a movie. They do a lot of really interesting cultural programming. And they went out of business in the early 90s. And it wasn't until around 2000, 2001 that Superflix became the screening room and really took over that kind of art house, community-minded film niche. So it kind of really sat vacant for, I don't know, maybe close to a decade. I wasn't in Kingston at the time. But yeah, so the screening room's been around for a little over 20 years. And I've been the owner since 2011. Is there more that you would want me to speak to on that, or is that?
No, that's good. And so of course, since 2001 at least, and I think from what you just said, for the entire time that movies have been shown at that location, it's been the only option for in-person live screening in Kingston.
Oh, well, almost. So there was the Empire Capital 7 Theater up the street. It closed in 2013, I believe. And then they opened up a new multiplex near the 401. So, so in the past, I guess when they were still around, it was not a lot of special events happened there, but the Kingston Canadian Film Festival took place both at Capital 7, and it would take place at the screening room as well. And then when they closed, really, we became the only theatrical venue at all downtown. By the way, when it comes to theatrical release films, they're released on a particular file format that requires a particular type of projector. You wouldn't be able to play a theatrical film at the public library, for instance. You need a $50,000 projector to be able to play theatrical release movies. And so we are, I think, for mostly any group, we are the venue of choice if you want to play a movie for an audience in Kingston.
Okay, I'll leave. Thank you.
Next on my list is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you. Thanks for being here tonight, Wendy. I just wonder if you could share with us the efforts that you've taken to create a COVID-safe space.
Yes. So, well, of course, we've been old school. Up until this point, we've been very old school. We used to be a cash-only business. You couldn't buy tickets in advance. But of course, that's all changed. You can tap and pay. And then more importantly, you can select your seat and purchase your ticket before you come to the theater and have, contactless transaction with staff. And all of our seats are socially distanced in these sort of like these little clusters or groups. So our capacity is down. It's 25% of what it used to be. So our smallest theater, which normally seats 47, now it sells out with 10 people. Although frankly, that doesn't even happen all that often because it's so slow. We don't even really hit capacity. And of course, we between each screening, we sanitize the seats or just sanitizing surfaces all the time. And one thing too, I can say, since we did a major renovation of our space in 2017, 2018, which we are still paying off, but it was a fantastic renovation. We got entirely new upgraded HVAC for all of the theaters. So every single theater, all three of our theaters has its own dedicated, very new, like up a standard HVAC system with like a pretty high, pretty like strong filter. And then what else are we doing? I'm trying to think. Of course, we have hand sanitizer everywhere too.
Thank you, Wendy. And I have to say, it's actually one of my and my husband's favorite places to go. And we have been there where during COVID, when it was just the two of us, and we were really delighted that you still decided to keep the lights on. And this must be a very hard time for you. So I really encourage everybody to attend because it is a great space and I know it feels very safe. So thank you for all you do.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much. We'll now move on to our next delegation. So at this point, I will invite Bruce Downey to speak to clause 3, subsection 1 of report number 88 from Heritage Kingston with respect to 85 King Street East and 46 Simcoe Street. Mr. Downey, you have the floor.
Good evening. Thank you very much for us seeing this evening. Can you hear me okay? I have given that. Thank you for this opportunity to address council. I'm accompanied this evening by Stephen Sorensen, the owner of 85 King, 46 Simcoe, Alberto of Gowling WLG, with Mr. Sorensen's legal counsel, Mark Tao of the IBI Group of Planners, and Mark Peabody of Peabody Construction. This project has some characteristics that we thought members of council might have questions of, and we wanted to make ourselves available. I am acting as a consultant through Michaela Hughes Architect for Mr. Sorensen. The construction outlined in the staff report follows discussions held over the past year. The staff report makes note of a planning application, which has been in the process along with his heritage application. The heritage approval suggests the proposed configuration, arrangement, and detailing is appropriate, and the heritage character of the property is consistent with the heritage district. We felt this position needed to be determined prior to presenting the proposal for approval with regard to its compliance with current bylaws, since the bylaws are just that, they're current, and the property and heritage district display a fabric of a different time. Current practice, though, seeks to ensure that historic materials such as masonry and wood and metal is still able to be maintained. In compliance with these policies, and there are policies that support that practice, details for this project have been provided and accepted by staff that demonstrate how the proposal retains the ability to provide that attention. I have been assisting Mr. Sorensen for 5 years on work related to these two properties. I have grown to understand the strength of his dedication to the care of the residents and the carriage house building envelopes, as well as the site elements such as the stone wall and the iron gate and fence, towards which he has invested in the order of $2.75 million. I have worked with historic properties for over 40 years and found the work carried out on the existing fabric has been textbook quality and a pleasure for me to witness. We look forward to continuing to enhance the property. We're very pleased that Heritage Kingston is in support of it, and we seek council's approval for the construction described in the staff report before you this evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Downey. I've been witnessing the ongoing work at the site as it is in my district. And I must say I'm very impressed with what I've seen from the outside. I've not been on the property, but I've passed it many times. I live nearby. I think the heritage application and appearance of the Heritage Committee went according to normal procedures. And I was just wondering about one of the conditions, because I know this has been a source of comment from other residents in the district that have been brought to my attention in the past. So condition number 6 in the recommendations says that the owner shall complete the limestone cladding of both sides of the garden wall to the extent possible. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit of the history of what this condition, what its context is, and how, whether it's feasible to complete the limestone cladding on both sides of the garden wall and what that would look like. Mostly I'd like you to fill in the residents that may be watching that have commented on the unfinished wall about what this condition would mean in the future.
Okay. That wall has an interesting history to it. It was Mr. Sorensen's intention initially to construct a solid stone wall similar to the one that borders along the Simcoe Street boundary of the property. And he had masons price and begin to look at what that would entail. It became difficult to determine whether or not he would be able to access both sides of the wall because of the construction and relationship with the neighboring property owner. And so he constructed a concrete wall with the intention that it would be clad in stone. Initially, his intention was to have a completely stone wall, but another option, a very popular option these days, is to build a concrete wall and clad it in stone. So it looks like a solid stone wall, but it has a fairly solid structure underneath to carry it. So Mr. Sorensen built the concrete wall, or had it built, and then he ran into some difficulty sourcing the amount of stone that was needed. So his intention is to clad the wall, all the visible portions of that wall, with stone. There's still his intention that he can actually get at. That has been encumbered somewhat by the fact a fence was built on the west side of that wall, but whatever portions of that wall are exposed, Mr. Sorensen said that he intends in cladding it with stone. And he has to wait until that stone becomes available. Now products like that are more difficult to get, or they take longer to get, but his intention is to clad it in stone. So that, okay.
I'm just wondering if I would be permitted to add some comments to Mr. Downey's.
Just briefly. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I would just point out that the Heritage Committee was on point in noting that the access issues are not key to the heritage consideration, and that the provision of the condition stating that it's to the extent possible makes it clear that, you know, if access is denied, that wouldn't prohibit completion of the works.
Okay, so to summarize, I guess what I'm hearing is that the applicant intends to clad the wall as much as possibly can, and so therefore would be in compliance with condition number 6.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councillor Stroud,
that wasn't a question, Your Worship.
Well, it technically was, but I'm going to let you away with it this time, but please make sure you ask 2 questions. It was a question, but I'll allow it as just a summary And if you have a second question, go ahead.
As long as you're applying the same rules to everyone, Your Worship, it should be fine. The second question is to do with the sort of future plans. Does the applicant intend any future work that would require future heritage permits that are not encompassed in this application?
Mr. Sorensen has been concentrating for the past number of years on the envelope of the buildings, which has taken quite a bit of funds, as I've mentioned, and attention. And he has accommodated himself in the carriage house, or renovated carriage house, and has begun to look at the interior of the building. And as his attention turns to the interior of the building, there may be some other alterations that come up, but his primary focus has been to secure an envelope that was in pretty bad shape. And he's done that. And he's had these garages on his mind for a little bit, so he wanted to see about investigating that. But he is beginning to turn his attention to the interior, and there might be issues, heritage-related issues that stem from that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Downing. At this point, we'll move to our final delegation on our agenda. We'll invite at this point Greg Tilson to speak to new motion number 2 with respect to movie theaters.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my name is Greg Tilson, and I sit on a new committee, Friends of the Screening Room, and I'm the artistic director of the Skeldon Park Arts Festival, and have helped to produce a couple of feature-length films and several short films in Kingston. So thanks to Councillor Hutchinson and Neil for this motion in support of movie theaters. I just want to provide some additional perspective for council to consider with regards to the importance of local theaters, citing the screening room as a local theater example, echoing several of Wendy's comments. I just would like council to consider for a moment the importance of Kingston's cultural spaces, how important it is to you and your constituents that these venues will still be open for the public when the pandemic is over. Not unlike a local gallery or a concert hall or museum. Ask yourself how important it is that your local cinema, where you attend your favorite films and other community events with family and friends. For me, local cinema, like the screening room, is really a pillar of our arts community and social fabric. Providing more government assistance for a theater like this is not simply about supporting a local business, which is important, or not only supporting a cinema, which is popular, but also supporting an arts and cultural institution that is so valued by Kingstonians. So the community's need for an arts and cultural venue like the screening room lies far beyond our enjoyment of blockbuster Hollywood movies. I think it lies at the heart of our need for community. The screening room has been providing accessible and diverse programming for over 20 years, as was mentioned. Movies in general are just such an accessible art form. This community theater is sharing so many local films where we meet local filmmakers and actors and producers, Canadian independent films where we see ourselves, reflected in ways that we may not otherwise consider. And so many other diverse programs that you may not otherwise have the opportunity to see, including community organized events, that often feature unique and non-mainstream screenings about everything from beekeeping to prison farms. So what the screening room provides for Kingstonians is a space to celebrate art and culture in a way that could never be realized through an online platform like Netflix. Cinemas need to stay engaged with their audience. So I'm asking you to help, let's achieve this together. As a festival director, I can attest that Kingston festivals, as Wendy mentioned, which are also important for our community and economy and tourism, rely heavily on a local cinema like the Screening Room. Indeed, the Kingston Canadian Film Festival was launched at the Screening Room back in 2001. Kingston Writers Fest, Real Queer Film Festival, the Skeleton Park Arts Festival, among many other local events, all program extensively at the Screening Room, most often for reduced not-for-profit booking rates and sometimes even for no booking fee at all. So the Screening Room is very generous when it comes to supporting community initiatives. It's an example of a theater that, as Councillor Hutchinson aptly states in his motion, is integral to the social, cultural, and economic life of our communities. This downtown theater is an example of a very safe and vibrant business for our local economy. As Wendy said, not one person worldwide has contracted the virus in a cinema. And there's ample physical distancing seating, so each group of moviegoers in the same bubble can be seated within a 6-foot radius, empty space. And you may want to consider this, as this was alluded to, this safe moviegoing environment next time you may be with friends eating at an indoor restaurant or drinking at bars and facing each other and talking and so on. So anyway, as Wendy mentioned, the Screening Room is losing money during the pandemic. Wendy has been such a leader in our community for many years now, but the sacrifices she's enduring is bearing an increasingly heavy financial burden to help keep the theater afloat. As a supporter of the Kingston arts community, I feel for one that we owe it to the theater to work with Wendy to help save this social, cultural, economic institution for the betterment of the city of Kingston. Ironically, as history has demonstrated that it's often the theaters that help provide relief during a crisis and help our communities get through tough times. So, let's thank you. Let's take the opportunity to do the same for local theaters like the Screening Room. Help keep the doors open during the pandemic and beyond, and stay tuned for other fundraising initiatives on the Screening Room website. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you again. And thank you to all our delegations this evening. At this point, we will continue on our agenda. We have no briefings this evening. Petitions, there is a petition bearing approximately 16 signatures with respect to the location of a large billboard sign at 3446 Highway 2. It was submitted by John Wernham to the Office of the City Clerk on October 22nd, 2020. Are there any other petitions to present? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, I have a petition here that I can submit to the clerk as soon as possible, bearing 294 names, and it says, "We, the undersigned, ask the City of Kingston Council to reaffirm its commitment to rank ballots as an option for municipal elections by supporting the motion as such before council on Tuesday, November 3rd. So that's 294 people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other petitions? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We do have one motion of congratulations moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that a motion of warm congratulations be extended to Councillor Hill and his wife Catherine Hill on becoming grandparents for the first time. All the best to their daughter, son-in-law, and new granddaughter. Welcome to the world, baby Eliza Catherine Hill. Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no deferred motions, so we will move on to reports. First up, we have report number 85 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that report number 85 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
There's just the one clause, archival storage and management agreement with Queen's University. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next up is report number 86 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that report number 86 from the Chief Administrative Officer, recommend, be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, so for the first clause, council representation on I Create Community Advisory Board. I am looking for a volunteer to be appointed to the advisory board for the remainder of council's term. Councilor Doherty, volunteer. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to put their name forward? Okay, seeing none, then we will then look to approve clause 1 with Councilor Doherty as the council appointee. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, clause 2, Lionhearts Inc. Food Provision Fall Winter 2020-2021. Okay, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 3, Williamsville Main Street extension of the interim control bylaw. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, I'm wondering if staff could comment on the number of potential applications that could come forward in this extension period. I'm just trying to get a sense of practically what it means for the planning process as a member of the planning committee. Are we thinking we'll see more applications if we extend?
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So from an overall staff perspective, in terms of some of the conversations that have come up through different consultations associated with this policy work, there could be a potential of 3 or 4 applications. There have been some property owners that have identified an interest in moving forward and thinking about plans that would go above and beyond the as of right zoning that's in place now. So potentially, if the interim control bylaw as it's proposed this evening isn't extended and there's a gap between when it's received at committee and when the bylaw expires, technically new applications could be filed that would be grandfathered in under the current policies as they are. And for that reason, we brought this report forward tonight for council's consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we will call the vote on clause 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to clause 4, phase 2, safe restart funding, municipal operating streams. Councilor Kylie.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. A question that I had to Ms. Kennedy, if she's here, perhaps CAO Hurdle. I emailed in advance because when I was reading the report, I didn't understand the condition that we have to spend the money of phase 1 by a certain date. And the example that stuck out was transit. The $5.3 million needs to be spent by March, I believe it was. So can staff help us understand what happens to the money if we don't spend it?
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I can't get the video working for some reason. So yes, there's 2 pieces of the funding. The general municipal funding, which we are requesting to do a phase 2 for, that did not have a repayment requirement on it. So the phase 1 monies were available for 2020, and if there was more than we needed, we could put that through to 2021. The transit eligibility requirements were a little bit different. The phase 1 for the transit funding was for costs eligible up until March 31st of 2021. And it was very clear in the initial instructions that those monies would have to be repaid if they weren't spent by March of 2021. So those monies are actually kept quite separate from the general municipal funds. We are looking now, we will use some of them in 2020. We will have a significant portion of that $5.3 million that will go into 2021, and we will need some of it for the first quarter of 2021. I can share with you, we've had some numerous discussions with some of my colleagues across the province that have transit operations. Everybody's pretty much in the same boat. They don't have a huge deficit in 2020 because they've taken on a lot of strategies to try to address that early on. But they do have 2021 budget challenges with transit, with the reduced ridership right across the province. So we have put those concerns forward to the province that that is the case and that we need those monies well past March of 2021. So we are hoping that the province will listen and perhaps just extend that eligibility period until at least the end of 2021 for us, which is similar to what they did with the municipal funding, where they basically said, just take it into 2021 if you need it.
Okay, that's helpful. And because it's separate, as you said at the beginning of your answer, it wouldn't impact our future application. I guess my concern in reading it was wondering if we don't spend what they've given us by the deadline, are they gonna deem us ineligible for something in the future? Because it might look like we don't need it if we haven't spent it, but I'm guessing based on your first response, that's a no because they're different programs.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, they are completely separate programs. In the application that we have to file for the general municipal phase 2 monies, we do show the transit operations within it, but then we actually pull them back out at the bottom of the reports that we have to submit. So yes, they are treating them completely separate.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we will call the vote then on clause 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on now to report number 87 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Kiley, that report 87 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, so there's just the one clause, approval of official plan and zoning bylaw amendment 9 North Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, now on to report number 88 from Heritage Kingston.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, moved by Deputy Mayor Osterhoff and seconded by Councillor Doherty, that report number 88 from Heritage Kingston be received and adopted.
Okay, so I'm going to separate it out clause 2 subsection 1 respect to 98 Clergy Street East because it's come without a recommendation. Are there any other clauses that council wishes to separate? Yes, Councillor Stroud.
Sorry, I'm looking at the report. The clause that is for 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street. So that's clause.
I heard. Oh, sorry. That was just for the first one. So 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street.
Yeah, it's the same clause. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was the second clause you referred to. Okay. Councillor Ostroff.
Yes, Mayor Patterson. Could we not separate them all?
Yeah, we can basically do that, but we can separate them all. There are a couple that I didn't know if there would be any discussion on.
Right.
That is in order.
Quickly then, but because of the little bit of confusion on everyone, I thought it would just be helpful for everyone to just pause for a moment. Got it, go. Yeah, that's my idea.
That's fine. That's fine. We can do that. We don't ordinarily do that, but I think in this case, given the number of questions and discussion, we can do that. Okay. So with that, we'll first look at clause 1, subsection 1, approval of application for heritage permit 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So first of all, I'm sure members of the public noticed, if not also members of council, that we on council know that this is coming from a committee meeting and that we can always access the original content and the full, the plans and the recommendation and everything that was brought to the committee by going to the original committee meeting links. And we can access all that information. We can also go on Dash. But if you're a member of the public, you click on tonight's council agenda and you go to the link for the heritage, the report number 88, and you'll quickly see if you click on that link that the first two, this one and clause 2, are not, that they're not those packages. The information that is attached to those two clauses is not on that link. So my question to staff is, how would a member of the public access that information?
Ms. James.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you. All reports, Councillor Stroud, are available on the council meeting calendar on October 21st, where the Heritage Kingston agenda and reports were located prior to the meeting.
Yes. If you were a member of the public and you were interested in the heritage applications and you clicked on report number 88 on tonight's online presentation, you would not have access to the first two sets of information, but you would have access to items 3, 4, and 5 and 6. So could you explain why that is?
Ms. James?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you. Items 1 and 2 on the Heritage Kingston agenda tonight were not included because they are part 4 and they receive a recommendation from the Heritage Kingston Committee. Sorry, that would be items 1, sub 1, and sub 2. Item 2, the report was included on tonight's agenda because there was no recommendation provided from Heritage Kingston. So the report was provided to council for that reason. And the remainder of the reports were provided because they are a part 5 consultation where Heritage Kingston does not provide a recommendation to council. They only provide their support or non-support.
Okay, so item 1 and item 2 are part 4 designated properties with a direct recommendation from the Heritage Committee, which is in the agenda. And is the recommendation that's in the agenda the final recommendation after amendments that happened at the committee meeting, and therefore different from the package that the committee received for October?
Ms. James?
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you. The recommendation for item 1, sub 1 is the staff recommendation that was presented to and approved by Heritage Kingston. The recommendation for 1, sub 2 is the recommendation that was approved by Heritage Kingston. This is a report from the Heritage Kingston Committee and therefore contains the recommendation that was approved by the committee. Should any member of the public wish to review the original recommendation for the 15 McDonald item, which is 1 sub 2, that recommendation is contained in the report that is attached to the Heritage Kingston meeting, which is on the City of Kingston calendar and available to the public.
I'll get to 1 sub 2 in a minute. My colleagues will see how this can get confusing, but so 1 sub 1, which is 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street. It's 2 addresses for the same location. It's two addresses by the same applicant. So just to be clear, though the recommendation in the agenda has 7 alterations and 6 conditions, and if you compare it to the package from October, there are some changes that reflect the work of the committee in October. And so the 7 alterations with 6 conditions as read in the package tonight are the amended recommendation. There's the amended recommendation from the Heritage Committee, correct?
Councillor Stroud, through you, there was, Mayor Patterson, through you to Councillor Stroud, there was a friendly amendment at the committee. So yes, you are correct that item 1 sub 1 for 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street does have a small amendment to it. But again, the full recommendation that was prepared by staff and presented to Heritage Kingston would be included on the Heritage Kingston agenda for October 21st.
So what I'm trying to do for the sake of transparency is have the up-to-date recommendation in front of council tonight for what we are voting on, yes or no. And is that the 7 alterations and 6 recommendations that are on tonight's agenda?
Yes.
Yes. So sorry, this is painstaking, but it is confusing. So, so there is the condition number 3 which is on page 9 of 25 of the agenda. It's the 5th clause on that page because there's a number 7, which is a carryover from the previous page, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's item number item number 3 of the conditions. So the 3rd condition, that the manse cannot be demolished until such time that a site plan has been approved and registered on the title of the lands. Are we then voting on that recommendation tonight?
Through you, Mayor Patterson. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then I have a question to planning staff. Is it not true that the applicant has not yet submitted a planning application and therefore there is no site plan process that has begun yet for this property?
Ms. Gummel?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, that's correct. No application has yet been submitted, but site plan control application is required.
Okay, so when you say it's
Councilor Stoddard, I'm just gonna give you a warning. We've got about 30 seconds on the clock. So go ahead.
okay, so the site plan is required by what?
It's required under the Planning Act process, which is sort of separate and parallel to the Heritage Act process.
Okay, so could you please explain why it is that staff is recommending demolition of this manse, which has Part 4 designation, Part 4 of the Heritage Act, therefore implying that it has heritage value? Why is it that staff is recommending that it be demolished?
Thank you. That's a great question through you, Mr. Mayor. In this case, we certainly acknowledge that the manse has heritage value. What we're recommending is that also in this case, it does make sense based on the redevelopment plans that have been submitted to consider its demolition. Essentially, the manse itself is not, although it's associated with the church as having been a manse, it actually hasn't been the church's manse since the 1970s. And it's a very different architectural style from the church itself, which we consider to be the main heritage attribute on this site and the more important feature.
Final question. So from my understanding, having chaired the committee, what the heritage application process does is it reads the application against the Heritage Act and the planning context. And so when a recommendation is made, does staff take into account other factors that may be mentioned by members of the committee or by the applicant themselves or their agent at the Heritage Committee meeting that are not directly related to the Heritage Act? Like points that aren't related, such as this is important because we have a housing crisis, or this is important because if we don't have this particular demolition, we can't complete the project, things like that. Are those carry any weight with the staff recommendation?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. No, those items do not affect our recommendation. Our recommendation is really based on the merits of the proposal, and considerations such as timing or funding deadlines and that sort of thing. We do our best to accommodate those kinds of issues, but they don't actually impact our recommendation in any way.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the reasons given for allowing for demolition of the manse just a couple of minutes ago was that it hasn't been a manse since the 1970s. But does the manse have, well, I think it was allowed that the manse had heritage value in it for itself. Is that not correct? I'm speaking to the planner.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely, the manse does have heritage value on its own. It's a lovely representation of an Edwardian brick home.
Right. So I think And it was said that it's not the same style as the church, but then it was probably built after the church, and it has value of its own. So I'm not sure how that's an argument for demolition. You have a response to that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, and through you. So, and that, I think that's it's a really interesting point. So in this case, the church is a collegiate Gothic style that was actually built in 1930. The manse building was actually built in 1907. So the manse actually predated the church. That's because when the manse was constructed, it was associated with a previous version of the church that was on the same site that had been built in the late 1800s. So that is sort of why we have this very unusual site with a 1930s, Gothic collegiate church, and then an Edwardian house kind of right up at the street on Princess Street and angled oddly from the church, because essentially the church was built in behind the manse when it was constructed. One of the kind of really, I think, one of the aspects of the church that makes it a landmark is the way that it's angled at the corner at Princess and Albert. And it really helps to frame the street there, and it's an important building. And the way that the manse is situated actually detracts from this. And so I present these considerations just to let you know some of the facts that staff considered. There are also other considerations here, including the fact that this is located right on Princess Street, which is intended to be, as we've discussed quite a bit lately, an intensification area for the city. So part of it is the context. We've observed through our review of this particular application that there are a number of very similar examples of this type of house in the surrounding side streets. And my observation is that that's the ideal location for them. It's actually more difficult to use Princess Street in the way that we're intending through the Williamsville work with these types of house form dwellings right up against the sidewalk.
Okay, I acknowledge what you just said there, although part of what you said in the beginning tends to indicate that the 1907 manse would have more value than perhaps the church. But I understand what you're saying about other examples. I guess the issue is we see before us at planning, at Heritage, all the time where houses have been adapted for use. And I'm just wondering why that isn't possible in this case, as is the church. And the whole point of Heritage is to maintain and extend your identity through time, and to be able to identify with what has come before, but adapt under certain circumstances to modern needs. So I'm of course speaking, well, maybe it's not obvious, it's just not me that's speaking, other people have been speaking to me. So I'm just wondering why staff would not push to maintain this. I mean, the importance of the house could be argued, it's on the main street. That's an important point. So you can see where I'm going. And could you respond to that, please?
Absolutely. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to note, right in the beginning of your question, you mentioned that the date of construction of the manse might suggest that it actually has more heritage value because it's older. And I think that's a really interesting assumption because I don't see it that way. I think there's a lot more that goes into the heritage value of a specific building than just the age of construction. And I think that really gets into kind of the difference between when we talk about historic buildings versus heritage buildings. Historic buildings, it's about the history and the preservation of materials and all of that kind of thing. Heritage really brings in another layer where we're introducing the value that a building has for the community. And I think in this case, we actually haven't defined what our ideal sort of framework is for measuring relative heritage value in Williamsville. I think we have a really good sense of that in the areas of the city where we have heritage conservation districts that really give a lot of direction to staff and members of the community about what the values are in that area. But we haven't actually done that work yet for Princess Street. So in this case, I would suggest that the strong heritage value on this site is actually in that 1930s Gothic collegiate architecture. It's actually a really rare era of construction because just not a lot of things got built in the 1930s. So it's actually rarer to see that kind of church than it is to see an Edwardian brick house. And I present that as sort of an interesting consideration when you're looking at the contextual value of these pieces. You'd mentioned that adaptive reuse of older buildings is very frequently possible and that they are planning to adaptively reuse the church. And I completely agree with you. I think in this case, we are relying on the applicants and the work that they've done with their architect and other technical experts in order to determine what is possible for them in their project. And I do understand from them that the two-story like brick home is very difficult for them to adaptively reuse because of the needs for accessibility and that sort of thing. It would actually be very difficult and I think quite costly to be able to turn that building into something that this particular user could use. My biggest hope right now is that there may be an opportunity to move the home, and that's something that I heard from home-based housing just today, that may be an opportunity. I think that would be a perfect solution because I really think that there is heritage value in this particular dwelling. But to me, at the end of the day, I don't think that the heritage value of this individual dwelling outweighs the possible benefit of the overall proposal that we're looking at here. I hope that clarifies some of those considerations. The other thing I did want to speak to, you mentioned about, sort of showing the evolution through time and the evolving nature of some of these buildings and how we can see that story play out. And it's really interesting because that's actually what the heritage character statement is for Princess Street in this location, is that the heritage character is based on the evolution of the street. And so I think it's interesting. Certainly this is one of the few house form dwellings that is sort of left on its own without any of those kind of strange commercial additions on the front that we see on some of the other houses in this specific location of Princess Street. But I would suggest that over time right now, our plans are not for that type of structure to be maintained on Princess Street. We're really planning to evolve into other forms of dwellings and more importantly, a widened pedestrian realm. So I think there are some other public interest goals here that are coming into play that help to sort of frame our approach to the heritage conservation of this site.
Okay, that was something of an education. Thank you. I agree with you about the longevity of the building is not the only consideration, because otherwise you could flip that about and you wouldn't be able to capture more modern buildings as being of architectural value or something like that. So I get that point. And the Heritage Committee voted for this, right? Is that, I understood that correctly? I can't see you and the report at the same time. So, okay, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, just to clarify, this is a recommendation from the Heritage Kingston Committee. So yes, they would have voted for it. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I have two questions. One is about utilities. So how come the utilities couldn't be provided from Albert Street? How come it had to come down Princess Street?
Thank you, and through you. I'm really glad you asked that question because I think there's been a little bit of confusion on this point specifically. I was able to touch base with Utilities Kingston employee today just to confirm my understanding of the situation. Essentially, we at the city or the staff of Utilities Kingston, we don't tell people how they need to hook in. They really present to us how they're planning to, and we work with them on that. So in this case, it's my understanding that it's not the direction of the city or Utilities Kingston that the applicants need to connect in this way. I'm not completely sure how that sort of misunderstanding has occurred, but my understanding is that basically the pipes on Princess Street are bigger than Albert Street, so it makes sense to hook into Princess Street, and likely there could be additional cost of hooking in on Albert Street because of the difference in the size of the pipes. I hope that helps with that piece.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is just about the answers you were giving Councillor Hutchinson. So the manse is 1907, but there's other Edwardian construction in the area. So if we allow the manse to be demolished, wouldn't that set a precedent for any other Edwardian structures in the area if they, come to the city and have to be, and they want to be demolished so that they can build a condo or whatever else would be going over top of the Edwardian construction examples? Like, wouldn't this be setting a precedent? And then how can the city stop that precedent from happening then?
Thank you, and through you, that's a great question. And maybe I can just include the thought that because we're talking about the fact that this form is plentiful, that could contribute too in terms of people saying, well, there's lots of them, we don't need to worry about it. I think I share that concern broadly, and it's certainly not a precedent that we want to set, especially because I think sometimes the most powerful kind of neighborhood heritage character that we see in Kingston is when we have a cluster or a whole bunch or a whole street of buildings that are kind of similar character. So I definitely think in this case, the reason that it's different is really because of the specific context and the specific location that it's in. And the fact that what they call associative value, so the fact that it was the manse that was connected with the church through time, that associative value in this case is not as strong because the manse was really only used for a manse until the 70s. And then after that time, the space was just rented out and the church had a manse somewhere else in town. So I really think it's the specifics of this particular situation that prevented from becoming precedent setting.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Neal.
Thank you. This is my district, and I've spent many occasions at the church, and I really value that corner. And I seldom, if ever, disagree with Ms. Gummel, but I'm going to be disagreeing with her tonight. I wanted to hear some of the questions and some of the discussion and debate before I chose to either move deferral or speak against it. And I believe I'm going to be speaking against it unless somebody else speaks up with more questions and somebody else moves deferral. A couple of things that troubled me. You say that there are examples of this on side streets off of Princess, and therefore we don't need to protect this. I take the opposite assumption. It's the last of this kind of heritage building on Princess Street. So the public have an opportunity to see it. Those similar heritage on smaller side streets, the majority of Kingstonians would not know that they existed. And it's a very, very well-built, sturdy building. It's been a rental building all of the 10, 12 years that I've been living nearby. And so I know that it's providing adequate housing. And so that it troubles me that we're saying that it no longer fits in to the development that's gone along Princess Street. Well, if it has heritage value, I mean, I'm going to really have trouble, because we always say this development does not set a precedent. This development is site specific. We shouldn't consider it in relation to this heritage building or that heritage building. But now we're being told we should demolish this building because it no longer fits in the modern developments along Princess Street, which I've supported for 10 years. But I also want to support heritage. And it troubles me that we're being told, and it seems we're being told before there's any concrete plans for what's going to go in its place. We're being asked to demolish a valuable heritage designated building without knowing what it's being demolished for, other than kind of a vague general idea. And we're being told it no longer fits in the streetscape. Well, most heritage buildings, or lots of heritage buildings, particularly in Councillor Stroud's district, may not any longer fit in the streetscape. But the rarer it is, the more valuable it is as a heritage designated building. So I came into this thinking I was going to be moving deferral, but I can't support this because I think the explanation why it needs to be demolished, I think could set a difficult precedent, as I believe Councillor Osanek pointed out. If we demolish heritage, 30 seconds. If we demolish heritage just because it no longer fits on the streetscape, but it's the only one along that streetscape, to me, that reinforces the idea why it should be protected. So I won't be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, just kind of hearing more about the potential for them actually moving the house. I'm wondering, basically, if maybe deferring this until we had more information on that might make sense. Because if they could just move the entire house, it basically removes the issue of deleting a heritage aspect of the city. I mean, if it can be incorporated and they can move it, that's been done before. So I guess I'd move deferral until we can get more information on the actual physical relocation of the property, if I have a seconder for that.
Okay, so we have a motion to defer, moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Kiley. So I know that the motion to defer is until we have more information about whether the house can be moved. I'm just wondering if staff can give an indication. Is it possible to defer to a certain a future council meeting? Or is there any other guidance that staff would bring on the best way to frame that motion to defer? So how long that it might take to get that information. Ms. Cumberland, go ahead.
Certainly. Thank you through you. So the possibility of being able to move the dwelling is something that home-based housing has told us that they're discussing. But I do not know very much about the specifics of that, and I do know that moving houses can be quite complicated. So I guess I just wanted to flag that may not be a simple solution, like a quick kind of solution. And I guess also just that we understand from the applicants that they do have a lot of urgency in the timing of this. As I clarified in the very beginning, that doesn't direct our recommendation. But I did want to flag that for council just because I do know that their work is tied to funding timelines with the province, where they have to reach certain construction milestones in order to get the funding. In recognition of that, we've certainly been encouraging these applicants to get all of their Planning Act approval or applications in as well, because those are certainly required and still need to be fully processed in order to permit development here to go forward. So I hope that's somewhat helpful just on the timing piece. I do think certainly the applicants would advocate for the things coming back to council the soonest possible date, because I believe that they do feel that they need this approval in order to move forward.
And I'll just move. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I'll move till the next council meeting then, because
yeah, I think that would be the best solution based on the answer from staff. Is that if you want to move a motion to defer to the next council meeting, and then the applicant can come forward to provide whatever information that they provide council. Okay, so a motion to defer this item to the next council meeting, moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Kiley. Any discussion on the motion to defer respect to time, place, or direction? Time, place, or direction. Councillor Ostrov.
Time, place, yeah. Direction. Well, you can tell me if I'm not on. I just, I was hoping we wouldn't have come to this, I guess. And maybe I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't have a delegation of sometime clarifying the situation, that this incredible opportunity that we have here with us to develop this this project. And it was made, and I'll ask Councillor Doherty to kind of help me here too in a minute if we can address that. I don't have, we're taking the presentation at Heritage at the face value. I don't think it super influenced us like we're not supposed to be, but I do think that it's something to recognize that significant funds are dependent on things moving pretty smoothly. I do wish as well that they would have talked about relocating the home. I'm quite sure it is possible. And, if that had come up sooner, we wouldn't be in this situation of talking about deferral, which I think we're pretty clearly told, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Doherty, that's going to perhaps not allow anything to happen there. This might, the sense I get is that the entire dream could fail if we do not give this support tonight. I guess we can't talk about the building right now. Sorry, it's on the deferral.
Yeah, I'm just,
thank you.
I know, Councillor Ostrov, I'm just gonna ask you to speak to.
So thank you. And so I don't think we should defer. I think that we should find a way to change the, recommend or strongly recommend that it be relocated and carry on. I think that it is completely engineered.
So Councillor Neal's raising a point of order. I have a feeling I know what his point of order is, and I think I'm going to anticipate it and just say that your comments have to be respect. So when you were raising the issue with time and about how it might affect the project, I think that's fair game. But getting into the actual project itself, we just have to.
Thank you. I apologize for that, Mayor President. I can't support this because time is too big a challenge for us right now. And I wish that we could have that clearly brought to us, because we're getting
point of order, Councillor Neal. I'll just put you on pause, Councillor Neal.
With all due respect, I believe we're debating the issue of whether to defer or not to defer. I thought that we can only address issues in direct reference to the deferral.
So on that issue, I will rule in Councillor Osterhoff's favor. I think it is fair game to speak to timing and potential implications of timing. So Councillor Osterhoff, you can continue.
So yeah, I'm asking us to not defer tonight, but to come up with a better option in the recommendation of what we are concerned about. So it's just too important that this project continue.
Okay. Anybody else with respect to time, place, or direction? Councillor Doherty.
I'm also concerned about the 1 month deferral. This motion was actually passed by a vote of 8-6 by Heritage. And I believe it passed by that huge margin. Sorry, 8-2. I believe it, maybe we can get confirmation from staff, but it passed, clearly passed, because there was a recognition of the importance of this project. It's the youth shelter, the integrated youth service hub with the one roof that we really sorely need for the youth in our community. So understanding the overall benefit helps Heritage Committee support the motion that's in front of us today. And the 1 month deferral may actually affect the funding, as Councillor Oosterhoff said. So I am definitely not supporting this motion, and the timing may have major implications. Thanks.
Just to clarify, I believe that Councillor Boehm's motion is to defer to the next council meeting, which would be in 2 weeks. That'd be just as a clarification. Anybody else that wishes to speak to time, place, or direction? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Can staff confirm that this project can't go ahead if we delay for 2 weeks?
Is there anybody from staff that can speak to timing?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I cannot confirm that because I don't have the details, but I can confirm that the applicant has told us that. What the councillors observed that they had said at the Heritage Kingston meeting, they expressed a lot of urgency.
Just to clarify, you said that. Are you saying that by November 17th, if this is not decided, they would lose funding?
I can't confirm that. I don't know that level of detail. Thanks.
I did see that Commissioner Agnew also put up her hand. Do you have any additional information or any other perspective to share?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Patterson. I don't have any additional detail, but just clarifying for Councillor Kiley that the information that we've been provided, I think what Ms. Gummer was just trying to say is that we've been provided the information as was provided to the committee, that the timing related to this approval was very critical related to the funding. But for us to have, the information related to the actual dates and how it relates to the provincial funding at a staff level, we do not have that. But that we're just reiterating what's been communicated to us by the applicant, as opposed to having firsthand information.
So I think that that's fair. So staff have indicated what information is available. Council's going to have to make a decision based on the information that we have, as imperfect as it may be. Councillor Kiley, was there anything else? Was it just questions on timing or any other thoughts or statements on that?
Well, on timing, I mean, this now becomes almost an impossibility if we're being pushed to make an immediate decision without clarification that an immediate decision is needed. Urgency is one thing, but that is a very big missing detail. So I find that very tough.
I don't disagree with you. It is what it is. So we will have to do the best that we can. Next on my list is Councillor Neal. Again, to time, place, or direction.
Yes, that's usually me saying those words, but yes, I appreciate that. I do have a question for planning. It's my recollection when we were debating another possible movement of a heritage building, this one, the outer station, there was a lot of discussion that it isn't just the brick and board, it isn't just the building, it's also the location. And if you don't have to answer that now, but if we're talking about deferral in order to explore moving it, I would appreciate our planning staff or our heritage staff discussing that idea of, is it just the brick and board that's heritage, or is it the location? Thank you.
I initially was about to suggest that that wasn't appropriate, but then once I got your full question, Councillor, I think it's absolutely in order. It speaks to direction that the motion defers. So I will allow staff to answer it. Ms.
Thank you, and through you. I think that's an excellent point. And based on my assessment of the heritage value of this site, I believe that the best solution would be to move this building. But understanding that, you know, Councillor Neal, you had expressed that you felt that the location and the fact that it was the last one in that particular location makes it important. I think that's the kind of like community level conversation that I think we need to continue having. Because I've certainly heard from the Frontenac Heritage Foundation that the fact that that's the last example of its kind on that stretch of Princess Street is something that gives it value from their perspective. I really do have a different perspective on it, though, in this case. You know, if it was a building like Macintosh Castle, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But because it is an absolutely beautiful example of an Edwardian home, but which is a style that's fairly common. And because it's not architecturally related to the main heritage feature on this site, I do think in this case, it's a different situation.
We'll agree to disagree. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay. Anybody else on time, place, or direction? Okay, next is Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you turn that off, please? Sorry, my mic is on. So to timing, first of all, just point out it's right in the report that the application was deemed complete in mid-September 2020, 90 days to give a response. December 13th, I think it is, around there, maybe it's December 11th, is the 90-day point for council to make a decision on this. That is the most pressing timing aspect. 2 weeks, if 2 weeks is a make or break difference for this project, then why haven't they submitted their planning application? If time is that important, why haven't they submitted their planning application? They haven't. We heard that from staff at the very beginning. I think a 2-week deferral is a very minor time frame in the context of this. And I think it's a very reasonable suggestion. Now, whether that will result in any meaningful effort to move the house is another question. So we might end up deferring and it coming back to us in the exact same form that it is now. So there is some merit to Councillor Oosterhoff's suggestion that we, rather than defer, we amend and get it done tonight. And if that were the case, then we would roll Councillor Boehm's suggestion into an amendment, which would be to strongly recommend that the house be moved and have that discussion. That is not what is under discussion right now, though. So I would suggest that we're gonna have to vote on this deferral one way or the other, but if it fails, we should look at an amendment.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Hill. Time, place, or direction?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I mean, I have to agree with what Councillor Doherty said. This is, I can't see this being resolved in a 2-week time frame. And this is too valuable a project. I could not countenance us doing something that would jeopardize that project. So I certainly won't support this motion to defer.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So while the discussion at council was happening on this particular topic, we were able to get a hold of the applicant on the phone to actually see if a 2-week deferral is something that would be feasible, considering their funding requirements. So they have confirmed that it could be deferred to November 17th, should council wish to do that.
Thank you for providing that additional information. That's very useful. Okay. Next is, so Councillor Bohm, it's your motion to defer. You've already spoken to, but you're going to have the last word. So I will come to you, but next is Councillor Hutchison.
I think that what the CEO had to say, that sort of settles this, in my view. But I did think, I had a memory that this project had received substantial provincial funding, and it has to be spent by a certain point in time. And I thought maybe that spoke to the urgency. Isn't?
So I would guess that's probably true, but if the applicant has confirmed that.
Yeah, no, for the moment here, but maybe we can find out or confirm or not confirm that that's the case. When we hear back, okay?
That's fine. So we can add that to the information request. Anybody else on time, place, or direction? Councillor Bohm, you have the last word on your motion to defer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I appreciate all the discussion there, and it was definitely helpful when CAO Hurdle called with the information that a 2-week deferral would not actually jeopardize this project, because it is a very important project, as other people mentioned. So with that being said, this would give us some time to, I guess, have staff send the message to explore the possible movement of that further, that house further in depth. And if that comes back the same in 2 weeks, then we still have the ability to amend it at that point to add the strongly worded language as Councillor Oosterhoff suggested. So that's all I have to say on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will call the vote then on the motion to defer. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to clause 1, subsection 2, approval of application for heritage permit 15 McDonald Avenue. So any discussion? Councillor Stroud.
Clarification from staff. I spoke to one of the committee members who mentioned that there was a compromise solution regarding the windows that was proposed at committee, but which did not go forward or was not approved. So this is a Part 4 designated property, not in the Heritage District, subject to its own designation bylaw. What is the status of vinyl windows with a Part 4 designated property, and how did staff evaluate the window replacement, which I understand partly already happening, had already happened prior to it coming to the Heritage Committee?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Generally speaking, vinyl windows are not desirable replacements for heritage styles because they tend to not look right. In this case, it has been staff's observation that the replacement vinyl windows are of unusually good quality, and they actually are a suitable replacement in this case. The applicant actually got an outside heritage consultant to give his opinion on that specifically, that the vinyl windows are somewhat, that the vinyl windows are an appropriate replacement. So just on the material piece. Now, in terms of there was some confusion, I think I could say, about whether the applicants were required to retain the original windows. The city has a windows policy that guides these sorts of things. And the main message of the windows policy is whenever possible, maintain original or period, so older windows. In this case, because the windows are not listed in the heritage attribute list in the designating bylaw for the property, the applicants were under the understanding that they did not need to maintain the original windows. So my understanding is that they had purchased a number of custom windows, but they did not begin installation until after we worked with them on their permit. So their concern is that they would like to use these replacement windows. I hope that is helpful. I'm happy to provide more detail if needed.
Okay, so I guess all I would say then is that when we do have a windows policy and an older designation bylaw I'm not aware of any that list the individual attributes such as the windows necessarily in those older designation bylaws. They didn't go into that much detail. So that would be an expected, that would be the expectation in this case. It was a detail that perhaps the windows policy was maybe unfamiliar to the applicant. They went ahead without, prior to the heritage application and made that decision to buy the windows. However, you've just said at the beginning on the other item that those kinds of considerations do not influence staff when they're weighing the implications of the heritage impact of the various decisions. Therefore, I don't understand why staff would recommend vinyl windows when it's contrary to our own windows heritage windows policy. So maybe you could give me that rationale.
Ms. Gilmore? Certainly,
thank you. Through you, so that yes. So I just want to confirm that what you said is correct. In this case, the ordering of the windows, I think, added urgency for the applicants, but it did not direct staff's recommendation. We have discussed it at all of the meetings because it's been an important point for the applicant, but quite right, it's not a key part of our recommendation. In this case, we have come to what we believe is a reasonable compromise that really reflects the intent of the windows policy while allowing the applicant to have a certain level of functionality and usability in the windows. So of the many windows that exist in the rectory building, 4 of them are quite a bit larger and more ornate. And so those are the windows that staff have really recommended be maintained, repaired and sort of maintained in their heritage, in their original condition. They won't be able to open those windows. So those windows will not be functional. And so part of the reason for requesting the additional replacement windows is so that some of the windows in the building are able to open to let in fresh air and they're able to provide a little bit more sound insulation from traffic and that sort of thing. So those were some factors that we did consider as part of our recommendation because I do think there is an important consideration to be had when we're doing an adaptive reuse of a building in terms of both livability and functionality. So we do try to strike that balance as staff when we're making our recommendations, but understanding that depending on the specific approach to heritage conservation, those types of concerns may not be valid. So the amount of sunlight or the amount of fresh air in a space actually doesn't enter into things quite frequently when we are talking about heritage conservation in Kingston. Thanks.
Okay, so we have to decide on this tonight. I would say, and just to be clear, it's just the windows that are the subject of this particular application. I would suggest that staff has tried very hard to find a compromise. They have achieved a recommendation to retain the most ornate and the largest windows at the cost of functionality for the applicant. the fact that they purchased windows in advance prior to the process starting should not have any weight, because they did know it was a Part 4 designated property at the very least, and they could have done research prior to obtaining the replacement windows and saved us all some time. But we do have to consider the precedent that we would set for bending our window policy in this way, and what that will mean, because this is I tell you from my 4 years on the Heritage Committee, this is a common request from applicants to have modern windows, and it's pretty much all very clearly defined in our own heritage policies that is not the proper way to do heritage restoration. That you don't replace the windows if you're doing heritage restoration. You restore the original windows because they can always be restored. The applicants tend to favor the cheaper replacement windows for not only the fact that they may be more functional because they're more modern design, but also because they're cheaper. And again, that's not a heritage consideration for the permit itself. So I'll leave it up to you on that. The recommendation is in front of us. I'm concerned about the precedent, but I do acknowledge that staff did manage to achieve some sort of compromise regarding the windows here. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So yeah, this is a bit of a complicated one, really, and I know that Councillor Doherty and I are both have tried to discuss it and kind of see both sides to this. But I did really appreciate hearing from Jillian Wilson too, and so you know, I'm suggesting that we not support the heritage recommendation, but actually go back to the planning recommendation of the compromise. We have a tremendous project here. We have tremendous investment on this property, and sometimes it happens. And so that these things happen. I don't think there's any ill intentions here, and we have an opportunity to, you know, I think we have an opportunity to win both ways, because it's not in this situation, as Andrea has explained too, and as we see that this is something that could work, and I think that going ahead with this recommendation is more a hardship, and that's really not what I don't think we need to see in this situation. We're going to see a beautiful, really well done windows, really well done situation. So I'm asking that we not support this recommendation.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have two questions, and about the vinyl windows that we're allowing to be put in. I heard Ms. Gummo say that the staff were impressed with the quality of the vinyl windows that are being proposed, other than the 4 that are going to be preserved for the wooden windows. So for the vinyl windows and the high quality, vinyl doesn't last as long as wooden. And so I just wondered, in so many years going forward, when these new high quality vinyl windows have to be replaced, is there somewhere in the site plan to be written that will say that the vinyl windows, the high quality vinyl windows, will have to be replaced exactly to the same high quality standard?
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. That would be the same situation that we're in now, where they would need to come to us for approval to replace those vinyl windows. So certainly assuming that the city keeps the current Heritage Act policy framework in place, that would be another conversation. And just confirming that it's true. We see that older period wooden windows, if they're well maintained, can last pretty indefinitely, but vinyl windows do tend to have a shelf life. I'm not sure if these, because they are higher quality, might last a little longer or not. I actually have heard from two different heritage professionals that they were very impressed with these ones, for what it's worth. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And when an applicant goes ahead and, you know, like in this case, they hadn't installed the windows, they had ordered the new vinyl windows, but without getting permission. And then there's provisions in the city bylaws, but what actually happens? Do the applicants get fined for doing something without permission before they go ahead and do it, or what happens? What are the consequences?
Thank you. Through you, that's a great question. So generally speaking, our approach has been a sort of friendly enforcement, voluntary compliance. Like essentially when someone has done something outside of the rules, we work with them and then they come right on board and they work with us. So generally speaking, we do not need to further pursue enforcement. We do have options to bring charges under the Heritage Act. But that being said, we recognize that that's a little bit of an unwieldy process. So we are looking at other alternatives right now. So I'm hopeful that we can bring a report for Heritage Kingston and Council in the coming months, just to talk about other options for enforcement, because we've heard that as a concern recently. We have seen quite a few specifically permits at Heritage Kingston where people had started work without the approvals. And, you know, we've talked a lot about how as staff, we're really not able to be everywhere and keep an eye on everything. So we are looking into other enforcement options that could help both as being a deterrent and as being sort of a way to approach these issues when they come up.
Thank you.
Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question to the planner. Does the relative cost to repair or reconstruct the windows versus replacing with new vinyl or steel windows, it doesn't sound like that's a given and it's not part of the process. And in a case like this, it looks like maybe it should be, because I know there's been numbers of cases in the past, going back a ways, where you know, heritage architects and others have been able to show people that it's actually easier or cheaper to do it, you know, to use the original, fix the original windows. I'm not saying it's the case in this case, but it seems to me a process issue that maybe leaves a gap, which induces people to do things that maybe they shouldn't do. Because I'm going back to your previous comment that it wasn't in the description of the heritage description. So that's a lacuna that maybe we could fill. Have you got a comment on that?
Certainly. Thank you, and through you. And I think cost is one of the biggest things that we struggle with at Heritage Kingston. We as staff know through our city's grant program the cost of some of the maintenance and repair and upkeep that goes on with heritage structures, and it is significant. I would say at this point we don't have a really solid way to deal with that concern. I think quite often at the committee we hear applicants, you know, raising concern about the cost of certain approaches. And in cases like with an example of sort of original versus vinyl windows, we do our best to educate and to talk about, you know, the idea that if these windows last you for 80 or, you know, 200 years, then they're likely cheaper in the long run. And I think the best we can do is really talk about that with applicants. I think it's not always that long-term of an investment for a specific individual applicant. And so it can be difficult for them to see it that way. But certainly from the city's perspective, in terms of the long-term maintenance of our heritage built form, I think it's an important consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Deputy Mayor, would you take the chair for a moment?
I will, Mayor Patterson, and I recognize you.
Thank you. So I appreciate the discussion that's happened on this file. So I think clearly hearing from staff on the attempt to come up with a reasonable, balanced compromise that finds that piece between heritage preservation, but also livability and usability. I think that that's really important. And I think I'm just going to make this statement that we want, as part of wanting to preserve heritage, we want to make sure that as a city, we're always seen to be working with owners and applicants of heritage buildings to find reasonable compromises where we can. So this is a compromise. It's finding a space in the middle. And I think that that sends a message to others that are looking at buying heritage buildings that, yes, we want to work with you and we want to find that space that works for the community, but also works for the person living in the heritage property itself, and finding those ways to be able to manage those. So I'm just going to just speak in favor of the staff recommendation. So just by way of process, I'm going to vote against the Heritage Kingston amendment, which would then allow a space for the original staff recommendation to be proposed in its place. Thank you very much.
I return the chair to you, Mayor Patterson.
Thank you. Anybody else that wishes to speak? Point of order, Councillor Hill.
So I want to get this vote right here. If we want the vinyl windows approved, then we have to vote against the motion. Is that right?
Right. So the recommendation that is before us is the recommendation from Heritage Kingston, which is different from the original staff recommendation that was proposed. So by way of process, if you want to support the original staff recommendation, council would first have to vote against and vote down the recommendation from Heritage Kingston, and only then would there then be an opportunity for a councillor to then move the original staff recommendation in its place. Is everybody clear on process there? Okay. So with that, then we will call the vote on the recommendation from Heritage Kingston. All those in favor? Opposed? And that loses. So at this point, I will look to council. If there's a councillor that wishes to move the original staff recommendation, moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Kiley. We will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to clause 2, subsection 1, approval of application for heritage permit 98 Clergy Street East. So there is no recommendation that has come from Heritage Kingston, so I will look to council for councillor to move and second this, to put it on the floor, and then we can discuss. Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Doherty. So we now have a recommendation in front of us. This is the original staff recommendation to the Heritage Kingston Committee that's now in front of us. Any discussion on that recommendation? Councillor Strapp.
I'm just trying to go back to make sure that I know what we're discussing here. So this is part 5, Old Sydenham Ward Heritage District. It's non-binding recommendations from the committee. The committee did not make a recommendation, but there was a recommendation from staff before the committee. So maybe a question to staff or the clerks or whoever, what happened at Heritage Committee and why did a recommendation not come forward from Heritage Kingston?
Thank you, through you. It was a tie vote. So in the case of a tie vote, it comes forward to council with a non-recommendation from Heritage Kingston.
Okay. Can I ask again to staff, is it known from the committee, or maybe it's a question to two councillors on the committee. Maybe Councillor Doherty remembers. Was it clear what those who did not support the staff recommendation, because that was half the committee, what it is that they, I presume it was something to do with the shed dormers, but is there any way we can find out what split the committee?
Councillor Doherty, you can answer that.
Thank you, and through you. Yes, the largest concern was the size of the proposed dormers. But as the applicant showed you tonight at the delegation earlier, that in the row of buildings, there are various sizes. So while it was a concern for some, it was certainly not a deal breaker for others. But that was the main concern.
Thank you. So I'll just say this. So what does the staff recommendation, what does it say? It said that the alterations be approved. That includes an enlargement of a rear dormer and repairs to the fire escape is needed, but essentially the dormer to be on a large, what they call a shed dormer, which is generally not recommended in the Heritage District plan. I know this because it's my district. So as Sydenham District Councillor, I don't see how I can support an application for a large shed dormer, regardless of whether it exists on the block or not, because of what it says in the district plan. So I would recommend that council vote against the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ostroff.
Sorry, just playing with the buttons. Yeah, I appreciate the presentation tonight too. This file is a little bit confusing to me too. I think I missed the early meetings, but I think that Councillor Doherty sort of said it well. Just to be clear, forgive me, Mayor Patterson, that this recommendation here says it will allow for the wider dormer. Am I correct? Yes.
Yes, this is the original staff recommendation.
Yeah, and I think that on the basis of livability, and again, it's part of the compromise that we do. And you know, someone said, like, I really appreciate this committee. Actually, this committee does work hard and planning. I'm very impressed with planning. I want to say that the work that they do here. This is difficult stuff. You know, it's going through the eye of the needle here. And, you know, I think I appreciate that, you know, Councillor Stroud says he can't because of it's written, but this is the balance that they try to strike. And I see it here again. And I think the presentation tonight kind of put it out there. I think it's still going to be such an improvement to that building. There's a real commitment by the applicant to do a great work there and be something that we can be proud of. And just being very honest with us, saying, look, this is going to help make it much more livable and enjoyable. And look at what they're accomplishing in the heritage component to it as well. So there's so many good things about this, and I think it's a very reasonable to accept staff's recommendation here with a wider dormer and comparable to others. And and so right, let's recognize it for what it is and let it move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Usually a little pop-up comes up and it didn't this time. So I don't really want to, I'm not going to contradict what Councillor Ustroff said. I think he makes some good points, and those points were made also by the architect. I just want to point out that that generally they do with the Heritage District, Sydenham Heritage District, and this speaks to Councillor Stroud's points, that the dormers, especially shed dormers, big dormers, are not to be over half the length of the roof. And I think it's a concern of some who take an interest in heritage that this sets a bad precedent. Now, Councillor Doherty pointed out, and you could see it in the description we were given, the schematics we were showing, that there are dormers there. It's hard to know when those dormers were put in or how long they've been there. And but the domination of the roof line and the nature of the building by shed dormers is not desirable, really, from a heritage point of view. So at the same time, as Councillor Roostrock pointed out, the standards of what you want to live in these days is considerably different than it was in over 100 years ago. One being that people are a lot taller. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem. I know this because I lived in an attic apartment one time, and not only could I touch both walls with my hands outstretched, but I could put my head on the ceiling. So the fact that somebody wants to make their building more attractive by expanding that is perhaps not too surprising. So anyway, I do want to make that point in favor of what Councillor Stroud was saying, and I understand why he would wanted to vote against that. It's very hard at this point to see whether something else could have been done. And I don't know if somebody on the committee acting as an honest broker can address that, or if staff can address that. But if so, I'd like to hear about it. Thank you.
Okay. I thought I saw Councillor Chappelle's hand, but I'm not seeing him. Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, so we will then call the vote on the application for heritage permit for 98 Clergy Street East. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to the next under clause 3, subsection 1, application for heritage permit 85 King Street East and 46 Simcoe Street. Any discussion? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be very brief. We heard from Mr. Downey and the other agent of the applicant. This is a very prominent Main Street, King Street, right by the park location, famous house. I can just report as district councillor that although there were several queries and questions and comments about the unfinished concrete wall on the property, and you heard my question to the architect, there have been no comments or complaints or negative feedback from Sydenham District residents in the neighborhood regarding the work in general on this property. Many people were impressed by the restoration of the stone wall on the other side, on the Simcoe Street side, and of the work on the coach house as well. So I would say that in general, there's a good precedent of the work already completed. And I take the agent at his word that the limestone cladding on the wall will be completed as it states in the recommendation. And therefore I recommend to my colleagues that we approve this application.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, we have the application for heritage permit 7 George Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And then finally, civic collection acquisitions, artwork, and documents related to the Dome of Kingston City Hall National Historic Site. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, so we got to the end of report 88 from Heritage Kingston. It's 9:40, so I'm going to propose that we take a 10-minute recess and then we will reconvene to complete the rest of the agenda. See you at 9:50. Okay, folks, it's 9:50, so we will reconvene. So next up, we have report number 89 from the Environment, Infrastructure and Transportation Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that report number 89 from the Environment, Infrastructure and Transportation Policies Committee be received and adopted.
So there's just the one clause, update on traffic calming policy review and 2020-2021 plans. Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I just have some further questions as carryover from what we heard at the committee. One of them is that with this staff recommendation, we're going to be suspending new traffic calming assessments. I think we heard at the committee that the new policy will come out by June, the end of June of next year in 2021. And through you, Your Worship, to staff, when we submitted, all the councillors submitted 2 streets a few months ago for the next round of analysis, when then will council hear how that analysis and the ranking comes out? When will council hear about the 2 streets we submitted this year?
Mr. Semple.
Through Your Worship, thank you for your question, Councillor Osanek. So the streets that were submitted this year, as you may recall, the 2020 program for traffic calming was also suspended as for any of those assessments due to all the changes that we saw in the travel patterns and traffic patterns related to the pandemic. So those streets that were submitted this year are a holding pattern waiting for assessments that could be completed in 2021. What we're talking about here in this report is that prior to starting or conducting any of those assessments, which we normally would undertake or start to undertake in the spring of 2021, we would instead focus on bringing the updated policy to the EFT committee to consider some of those changes that might consider overall for the policy.
So through you, Your Worship, my problem is that since we had that committee meeting a few weeks ago, I've had now calls from constituents to put 2 more streets into the mix. And with this being delayed a year, are we going to be, is this council, this term of council before the next election, are we going to be able to put in 2 more streets during this term of council, in addition to the 2 streets we just submitted a few months ago?
Mr. Semple.
Through you, Your Worship, that would be dependent, I think, on the ultimate process that would be recommended and then adopted by committee and council in Q2. So I can't necessarily speculate on what that overall process would look like. That's part of the review that's underway right now. But certainly, if there are transportation concerns or other pieces that arise in the interim, we are still addressing concerns that come in and ensuring that those are logged and reviewed. I think based on our information that we provided in the report, we conduct on average about 50 assessments a year as part of the traffic calming program. So if there were additional assessments that were requested, we certainly would endeavor to complete those. But I cannot speculate on sort of the number that we would be able to complete. I think ahead of the changes that may come as part of the review.
Thank you. We have a lot of traffic calming concerns across the city. As you definitely heard during the committee meeting, all of us chimed in and we could talk about traffic for hours. I think you also said at the committee that staff, you're going to be preparing a report on what the province is allowing on the new local level photo radar community zones. And when's that report going to be coming to council?
Through you, Your Worship. So as the motion that passed before council, where a report related to automated speed enforcement, an information report that would explain the implementation in Ontario and some of the results that we've seen in some of the larger municipalities. It is currently scheduled to come in Q2 2021, so at the end of next year. Automated speed enforcement, as we discussed, is one of the tools that can complement some of the traffic calming programs, but wasn't necessarily contemplated as part of this review that's underway.
All right, thank you for that information.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first off, thank you to staff who have been hearing lots from me about school zone issues in the Kings Court-Rideau district. So my first, I have a question about that, but my first question is, I guess taking a step back and thinking about the need for a policy, I think it's pretty clear in the report that the demand for traffic calming really exceeds our ability to do the work, our budget, et cetera. So do we have, once we get to the stage of having a policy, is that then the time when communications with the public can be clear and more aligned with the policy? For example, like right now it is difficult because you have to say, okay, well, there's a road safety plan, and then there's the school zone work, and then there's this, and I don't find that is a really good way to communicate to residents who have concerns about local traffic issues. So what can we see in the future coming out of this, out of a policy? And I know we don't know what that is still exactly, but like what type of, how will that alleviate some of the issues with, first of all, the backlog that has been mentioned, and secondly, the communication with the public to ensure we're not giving them the impression that we're doing work that we're not going to be able to do.
Through you, Your Worship. So I think that, and thank you for your question, Councillor Holland, because I think part of that ability to communicate with residents and with neighborhoods and stakeholders about the validity of their concern versus the action that can be taken is a difficult conversation to have, and it's a conversation that we have a lot. And I think that councillors are certainly familiar with, and it's something that we deal with from a staff standpoint every day as well. I think the intent of what we are looking at with this review, if you recall, the review that we're doing for the traffic policy stems from the guidance that comes through the city's road safety plan and the active transportation implementation plan, to ensure that the implementing policies we have, of which traffic calming is one of them, line up with the strategic goals that the city has and the transportation policies that are in place. So the intent of the review is to ensure that our implementing policy of traffic calming lines up with that. And there's some guidance that we're providing in that review that links in with council's strategic priorities. Specifically, the references to school zone safety and the neighborhood level active transportation and planning work that is underway. And the rationale behind that direction is, as we discussed, I think at the committee in great deal, was that we have over 600 kilometers of local roads in the city. Those roads have been constructed over a number of decades, and they reflect the design and the considerations at the time of construction. And they may not necessarily, or in most cases, do not reflect the current policies or the desires that are spoken to in policies and in the city's priorities. So we do need some way to prioritize that work and to begin that work, but it is not feasible for us to address every issue, to align it with the policies that the city has adopted now on every street across the city. So we need some guidance to better prioritize that work so that we can start to affect that change. I think that the traffic calming policy allows us to do, but also that is related to the overall addressing transportation issues overall in a way that's satisfactory both to the policies, but also to the residents and stakeholders that may be bringing those concerns up.
That's fine. You still have?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Okay, yes. So thank you. And then the other question, which I have some sense of, but I know again, the timelines are not certain. But when we say we're prioritizing the school zone work, that means prioritizing in terms of moving that forward sooner rather than later and prior to approval of the policy and implementation of further traffic calming measures. Is that generally correct?
Through you, your worship. So it is, it's sort of a two, I guess there's two aspects that are spoken to in the report. So the first is that there are a number of projects planned for 2021 that are outlined in the report, which come from the assessments that we have completed, but are aligned to the neighborhood areas and to school zones where concerns have been identified. So the 2021 projects are intended to line up with that approach that we're proposing. And that work would sort of be planned and then executed in this summer and fall of next year. But the policy work itself that would be underway, looking at how would we prioritize interventions to address transportation issues, some of which would include traffic calming approaches that might be familiar, but that we would also look at expanding the toolkit that we have, such that it wouldn't just be physical interventions, but it may include program pieces and work within the neighborhood. So the intent is to line that, again, with the areas that we've intended to do work in, but also to ensure that we can address school issues more broadly across the city. So using those two parameters, either the neighborhood areas where we're investing in active transportation as part of the AT implementation plan, or a school zone where an issue has been identified for some manner of intervention.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate all that, and I know that staff fully appreciate the concerns in the Kings Court Rideau District regarding a relatively new school and the introduction of another new, very large high school. But it is certainly my job to bring those concerns forward and to ensure that that prioritize. It is difficult looking at hypotheticals, and also given the post-COVID sort of work pattern and situation, I can fully appreciate all of that. But I think nevertheless, the concerns of integrating commuter traffic to a school, to a large school, and large numbers of students, and hopefully not too many being driven, but nevertheless, there will be that type of traffic. So incorporating all of those commuters of various types within the neighborhood traffic of the Kings Court area is something that is a major preoccupation in the district. It is what we discuss at every single community association meeting. And I would just really hope that however the work comes forward, we've lost time. I completely understand, appreciate all the reasons for that, but I do feel like we're getting to a point where we need to be able to be very reassuring, and the fact that the policy is not before us yet, will take a bit more time. I guess it's something that I hope we can continue to at least emphasize, that the school zone safety initiatives that we identified in the strategic plan are really at the forefront in our traffic calming initiatives and where we're going to put our resources in the future. So I just wanted to say all that for the benefit of my colleagues who maybe have not received the correspondence that I have on that particular issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Addressing staff and the plan, I think there's probably some apprehension amongst councillors that people, when it comes to traffic, I mean, there's two things I hear from staff is that we have a road system that doesn't encourage active transportation or safety or any number of things that people would like to see, and they're difficult to deal with. And I agree with them that is undoubtedly the case, and that we need to change the way we do things. For one thing, it's logistically really difficult to address all these issues all at once. So the problem is that people would like their councillor to get action, and they're not willing to wait for who knows how long while we deal with roads that are very difficult to adapt or accommodate for these other issues. So while I think this is in a logistical sense a good move and people should probably vote for it, I don't know if it's politically sustainable. And I'm wondering if staff have thought about that. I mean, people see a problem on their street, and at least the councillor can say, okay, I'll put that on my list and indicate, at least is what I do. I tell them that the action is not likely to be like anytime soon because there are so many other streets in the city that other councillors have a legitimate reason to want to get fixed. That usually buys some time. But with this proposal, I'm wondering where the buying of time comes from. I'm just talking, real politics here. And will it not encourage councillors to try to jump the queue, which we've already seen? And I see repeatedly, and that's part of the failure of the system, of course. That's a symptom. So I'm wondering how staff are approaching this political side of the issue because, elections happen. So
are you asking staff to wade in on the politics of traffic calming, Councillor Hutchison?
About the delays that will take place in any kind of action if we follow this, as I perceive it, if we follow this recommendation. Have they taken into account that people have limited patience?
Mr. Semple.
Through you, Your Worship, and thank you for your question, Councillor Hutchison. So I think the comments that I can provide, you touched on a little bit, but maybe if I can expand. The process as it exists right now is not manageable in the long run. So we are assessing and adding streets to an ever-growing list year after year and chipping away at that list at a rate that is, I believe in the report it refers to it as sort of rate of 3 to 1. So the list is continuing to grow. And our ability to actually action items on these streets that are on the list is really inhibited by the very process that we have in place that requires the assessment and level of assessment that were completed. And that is in addition to, so the process that, I guess the adopted process that we work through that takes the councillors' requests and assesses them annually is in addition to more than 200 requests that we're working through and assessing and providing feedback to residents on every year. So our I think from the existing policies standpoint, it is not buying time anymore because the list is continuing to grow, and we're not able to assess the issues. Not only are we not able to, I would say, address the issues, but we're not able to address the issues in a meaningful way because they are at a block or sometimes at a street level where we are then moving the issue in many cases to the next street over or to the next block over. So the process itself, and I think the very sort of narrow way that it looks at a specific block or a specific street may address a specific resident or group of residents' concerns, but it in cases shifts those concerns other places and sort of perpetuates what's going on. Our review of the process, and I think the approach that staff is looking at with our consultant and that we would be engaging on, is that there needs to be a more neighborhood level approach so that the changes that are put in place are more geared to addressing the issue that is at play rather than a very specific concern that could only move somewhere else. The second piece that I guess that I would put into that is that the application of traffic calming, when we then are able to sort of move through the assessment, identify a project, and then go out to put some of the traffic calming tools that we have at our disposal right now in place, are not one may not get at the issue in the way that I think residents were expecting it to get at the issue, but two we then do a lot of work with that neighborhood and continuing and ongoing work, explaining why that is there and dealing with a lot of people who do not want the traffic calming in place. Again, because it is oftentimes a very independent or individual sort of application that is occurring. So I think without, I can't really comment sort of on, I think, the political aspect of it, but I would say our review of the existing process so far suggests that it's not sustainable and that the work that we actually are doing could be better directed at a neighborhood level or in a focused way around some of the schools. And we're also looking at a variety of tools and programs that could help us do that in a bit more of an effective way as well.
If I may, I want to thank Mr. Semple for the summary of the report, which is useful, and I thank staff for that. And I generally agree with it. However, I'm wondering what the time, if you're going to look at it from a neighborhood point of view, how long do you think from point of complaint to addressing the issue do you think it will be? And do you have the budget to do that? Because it seems to me, my perspective is this: when I was first elected, and that's getting to be a while ago now, the budget was completely inadequate for traffic calming. Okay, and I remember we tripled it or something, and it actually helped for a while. So you had to wait your turn and all that, and that was fine, largely. And so now, if you do a neighborhood area, that seems to me to say, well, you need more money. And do you have the money in the budget to actually affect that? And how many of these neighborhood areas will it get to in a year?
30 seconds. And Mr. Semple, you can answer.
Through you, Your Worship. The budget for traffic calming, I think allows us to sort of affect change at a block level on 2 to 3 sort of blocks per year, depending on the intervention that we take. As part of the active transportation implementation plan, funds were included that allowed us to do neighborhood plans. And there was funding and discussion about the development of programs that would support traffic calming to a degree, but to address transportation issues. So I think at present, there's capital in place that allows us to move forward on the intent of both the AT and road safety work that we had discussed. But depending on the level of intervention and the review that's underway, we would and could include a discussion about the budget implications, I think both in the near term and long term, that could be part of that discussion.
Okay. I think I'm out of time, right?
You've got 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, so just to say, I think it remains a problem and a budgetary problem at that. So, and though I agree with the logistics, so there's a real tension here, and I think it will occur and reoccur as we go along.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I mean, I think that it comes down to we have a system, or have had a system for a number of years that just doesn't work. I mean, I have to go back to that comment that was made very early on in our term that you're not just a councillor for your district, but you're also a councillor for the city of Kingston. So if Councillor Osanek's got much higher priority needs in her district than I do in mine, as much as that's going to be a frustration for folks, residents in my district, that needs to take the priority, especially if it relates to safety. So we need to have some kind of independent assessment of what the real needs are and address what the real needs are at the end of the day. I think even inside a district, it doesn't work because you have different neighborhoods that are competing for what streets they want to have done or what kind of traffic calming they would like to see done. And everybody, is concerned about traffic speed and school safety zones and all those kinds of things. And so, I think we're going to have to spend some time educating our residents about how this system will work better to serve all the residents of Kingston. And yes, we're going to have to be a little bit more patient, perhaps, because there is only limited resources that that can be distributed to address these issues. But this is a system that ultimately will work better for the city of Kingston. And sometimes I think we need to put our district hat aside a little bit and say, okay, if this is going to work to address the most significant needs that we have in our community in general, then we have to spend the time working with our residents to help them understand that and understand that, yes, we could address all of the needs that they have, but it's going to cost them, an awful lot of money in increased taxes, and I don't think too many people want to see that. So I think we should be endorsing this effort. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. We may have opinions, and I will keep my comments to this particular committee recommendation, but the bigger picture is simply what we're up against is a very high volume of vehicles traveling at very high speeds. That's the big high level picture, okay? High number of vehicles traveling at very high speeds, and no amount of work that our transportation department can do will actually address the societal root cause of this problem. The societal root cause of the problem is people's lives are structured living in one place and working in another. It's that simple. And using large steel machines to get from one to the other that are a safety concern because of the speed that they're going, which is 3 or 4 times the speed that they were initially going at when they were invented. this is something that cities all over the world are struggling with. We can wait for the results of this study, but when councillors talk about jumping the queue, it's not so much to have a four-way stop put in as happened one time that councillor jumped the queue. It's us as a council might want to jump the queue by saying we need decisive action to slow all traffic down sooner rather than later, which may be a higher priority than anything comes out of this study or this work. So that, I say that because I'm the chair of this committee, and I did hear a lot of comments. Every single committee member had a lot to say on this issue. To me, it's a systemic problem, and if you read what's happening in other cities, it's not just happening in Kingston, it's happening everywhere. And we haven't led the way on this. And Kingston is not a leader in traffic calming by any means. So I think what I would say to my colleagues is, regardless of what comes out of this particular committee recommendation, we need to start thinking about what we can do to improve safety across the board to our residents, because we have virtual, we have unanimous consent, I would say, amongst all of our electorates that we want to see traffic safer. Just to use an example, in my district and Councillor Neal's, Brock and Johnson converted to two-way traffic, or from two-way traffic to one-way traffic in the 1970s, creating an expressway right in the middle of a residential area on Brock and Johnson Streets. Brock and Johnson Street stretch both of our entire districts. So to the question of whether this pits one neighborhood against another within a district, that's not true of Brock and Johnson. To fix Brock and Johnson, all you have to do is install bollards. It's already been done. It had a great effect. If you installed middle bollards, it would have a greater effect. But we heard at committee the other day that can't be done on a one-way, two-lane street for other reasons, for reasons that were stated by staff of the committee. So we either have to revert to two-way traffic on those streets or put in some other method of traffic coming from one end to the other, which would be the entire length of Sydenham District, the entire length of Williamsville District, to use that one example. That's the kind of thing that's not going to come out of this recommendation. Not necessarily, not from what I've seen so far. So we may have to consider a council initiative to bring about that safety. And that's what I'm thinking about as we wait for this work to be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will call the vote on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report 90 from the Arts, Recreation, Community Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 90 from the Arts, Recreation and Community Policies Committee be received and adopted.
So there are two clauses. Would anyone like them separated? Okay, so we will vote on them as a whole. Number 1, report on the pilot project to promote local music and musicians in terms of reference for the next iteration of YGK Music in support of sector development. And clause 2, appointment to 2020 Mayor's Arts Awards Working Group community members. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Nothing from Committee of the Whole. Information report, quarterly report, Tourism Kingston Q3 2020. Okay, seeing no questions, we will continue on. We have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business. Number 1, that the following members of council be appointed to serve as deputy mayor in 2-month increments as follows. December and January, Councillor Osterhoff; February and March, Councillor Holland; April and May, Councillor Hill; and June and July, Councillor Neal. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? That motion moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 2, that is requested by Nanette Forstake, Cancer Centre of Southeastern Ontario. Council proclaimed November 8th to the 14th, 2020 as National Medical Radiation Technology Week in Kingston. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Holland. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motions. We have two new motions on our agenda. Number one, moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Neal. Whereas Ontario municipalities are constitutionally creatures of the province and operate under statutory power granted by the provincial government, such as the Municipal Election Act, legislation which permits local governments to select the process by which municipal elections occur. And whereas during the 2018 municipal election, the City of Kingston, as directed by a council motion, held a referendum on the question of whether or not voters were in favor of using ranked ballots to elect mayor and district councillors. Whereas the referendum question was supported yes by more than 20,000 Kingstonians, representing almost 63% of the vote, precipitating Kingston City Council to further vote in favor of preparing the groundwork to establish a bylaw to conduct the 2022 municipal election under a ranked ballot system. Whereas ranked ballots are a fair, effective, and democratic tool which promote diversity and civility, employed with success by all of Canada's major political parties to select their leaders federally and provincially, and other municipalities to elect mayor and councillors like the City of London. And whereas currently the Ontario provincial government, as part of Bill 218, is seeking to amend the Municipal Elections Act by removing municipalities' ability to use ranked ballots without consultation or consideration for the democratic process by which Kingston residents express their preference for the system of voting. Therefore, be it resolved, the Kingston City Council reaffirm its commitment to rank ballots as a legitimate option for municipal elections, and the Kingston City Council write local MPPs Ian Arthur and Randy Hillier and Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing Steve Clark to ask them to work on this file with all parties and people of goodwill at Queen's Park, encourage the government to respect the fundamental principles of democracy and current provision of the Municipal Elections Act, reverse the government's proposal to remove ranked ballots as a legitimate option for municipal elections as per Bill 218, preserve the integrity and importance of local decision-making as seen in Kingston's council motions and city referenda supporting ranked ballots, and that Kingston City Council write the Association of Municipalities of Ontario to urge action across their network of elected local leaders, to ask them to work on this file with all parties and people of goodwill at Queen's Park, encourage the government to respect the fundamental principles of democracy and current provision of the Municipal Elections Act, reverse the government's proposal to remove ranked ballots as a legitimate option for municipal elections as per Bill 218, and preserve the integrity and importance of local decision-making as seen in Kingston's council motions and city referenda supporting ranked ballots. Councillor Kiley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you, and apologies for a long motion. Thank you for reading it so well. So I want to start tonight by thanking my seconder for bringing this forward with me and the number of colleagues that I've had the chance to talk to already. Particularly also, I want to thank the many people who have supported this motion on ranked ballots and local democracy. I presented the petition earlier of 294 individuals, and we saw a number of terrific delegations. About this motion, I think it really speaks to the spirit of engagement on this issue that's alive and well in our community, even 2 years after the referendum. We've heard referenced a number of times again in the delegation. And I think the referendum is the key thing here. There are 21,000, well, just about 21,000 people who almost exactly 2 years ago voted in favor of moving away from first past the post, which represents about 63% of those voters. And I hope that that is what we really keep in mind as we debate this tonight, because in my estimation, 21,000 is a fairly critical number. I look back at the official results of our last election, locally that is, and added up all the votes for the 12 of us winning councillors. I excluded the mayor because obviously we're elected district by district, and he's elected or she's elected, as the case may be, across the city. And what I found, I think, is very instructive, and that's of all the would-be councillors, so all of us, all the votes that we had total was actually 5,000 less than the 21,000 who voted for ranked ballots. So only 16,000 votes are represented by us councillors. For another example, I looked at the results of our most recent provincial election, and our urban MPP, Mr. Arthur, received roughly 21,000 votes, which is equal to those in favor of ranked ballots. So I would say that both our member for Kingston and the Islands and this council have a democratic mandate. And if that's true, then so it's true of ranked ballots, because again, ranked ballots actually had more votes than the entirety of councillors representing here tonight. So for this reason, we cannot let the provincial government dismiss the results of the referendum. And I think the reason that comes down to is that local decision-making should be the purview of local decision makers. And the Premier has agreed with this. I know a number of us attended the AMO conference last year, and repetitively, Doug Ford said in his keynote address that Queen's Park needs to get out of the way of city halls. And I think he's actually exactly right on that. But ironically, perhaps, Bill 218, the kind of subject of this motion, goes against it, overrides the referendum in Kingston, and it really is an example, in my opinion, of Queen's Park demonstrating significant overreach. So I'm asking us respectfully, as a partner in government, recognizing our constitutional constraints, to encourage the Conservative government's caucus and the minister particularly to listen to what the Premier said as a general rule, that Queen's Park should get out of the way of city halls. And I think that we must point out also that the current government elected Mr. Ford as their leader, and hence to become Premier of Ontario through ranked ballots, because they are such an effective means of selecting representatives, and they are really a simple process. Voters order who they want in office by their preference, 1, 2, 3. And as we heard from the delegations, not only is it simple, ranked ballots promote civility, ranked ballots promote diversity, they promote a deepening of democracy by extending the power of the single ballot across a number of rounds of counting, if that's needed. So I would say those are all good things. I think that if we can get more civility and diversity and positivity in politics, that would be amazing. And lastly, I just want to comment on the cost of doing that. So is the juice worth the squeeze, as the case may be? How much does it cost to do this? And based on the numbers that the city clerk provided, it's about $3.50 per voter for the entirety of the council term. So that's about 7 cents a month that we're asking each voter to pay to get ranked ballots as a reality. And I think that's really worth it. So I hope we can pass this motion, work with the government, write the minister, and reach out to other municipalities who are thinking very much the same thing. Do that through AMO. I know already that there have been motions in Cambridge, in London. I think that Peterborough and Barrie are also looking at it, maybe even tonight. So we're in good company.
30 seconds.
Oh, perfect timing. And I was just going to say, there's the old saying that we didn't come this far only to come this far. And there are about 21,000 people in our community who are looking forward to the next election to be able to vote by ranked ballots. And I hope this is a step in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think my colleague has said it very well and also very generously. I have my own concerns with Bill 218, and I would probably say a lot more about the motivation of this particular move, though I would not want to rile any colleagues with those comments. So I will not make those comments, but I think it's important to, as Councillor Carley has mentioned, remain focused on the message that we received, and also the fact that we as a council do actually have quite a bit of say over the democratic process of the future of this city. And at times it's that's a big responsibility, because we won't be there, and many of us won't anyway. And we need to get it right. And going back to when we had the ability to move forward with a ranked ballot election after the 2016 legislation, we were committed to doing it right. And we thought the best way to do that was to get public input in the best possible way, the most I guess, democratic way we could think of, which was to go through the process of putting it on the ballot and having a referendum. So I think, given the responsibility that we have to ensure that we continually evolve in the best possible way towards an institution that prioritizes the voice of residents in the city, I think we really must make a statement on this particular initiative. very strong statement. And I know that for some people it's difficult to take an adversarial position against the provincial government, which does, as Councillor Carlett notes in the motion, have fairly extraordinary powers over municipalities. But also, as mentioned, this is just absolutely one of those cases where that's our responsibility, and I think we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. I was very troubled when this came about because the electorate in the last election spoke very clearly what their wishes were. We are a democratic organization, I would hope, and so I really questioned the motivation. First of all, to use the pandemic as a rationale for reversing the decisions made by 63% of the Kingston electorate, I found really troubling. That's trying to alter something that's was at the time over 2 years away. And so I didn't see the link, and neither did Professor Rose when I asked him in delegation. It's hard to see a link between that and COVID. So what would be the rationale for doing this? It's really troubling that this has taken place. And I will be a little blunter than the previous speaker, who I think answered very tactfully. Ranked balloting is a form of electoral reform. And it allows people to say, this person is my first choice, but if they don't get to 50%, or if they get dropped off, this is my second choice, and this is my third choice. You can choose to do what's called plumping and just vote for the one person you feel really belongs in to be your representative. But it allows you a better opportunity. And for the Premier to suggest that, I think it's an insult to 63% of the electorate to say, oh, this is really complicated. You can't possibly count to 3. It really is an insult to the electorate who chose this form. So why would the provincial government and the Premier make this decision? And the only rationale I can think of is that the Conservatives are unlikely to ever to be a natural second choice to the Liberals, NDP, Green Party. And so it isn't so much that some municipalities are now doing this. It's a concern that in future, once people get used to this form of electoral reform, they might demand it in provincial elections as well. And that could be troubling to the Premier. So, and having spoken to some of my Conservative friends, they kind of smile and nod in agreement that you're right, we wouldn't be too many electors' second or third choice. So I think this is the Premier's attempt to squash electoral reform by saying, we don't want this to happen in municipalities because they may be demanding it of provincial elections as well. And it's the best way that I can think of to make it so that strategic voting is no longer the way to go about deciding how you vote. If I'm a proud Green Party member,
30 seconds.
Thank you. I don't have to decide, oh, I don't want to waste my vote. You can vote for the party of your choice, and then who the next party that you could support, or the third party you could support. So it's a much, I think, better form of actually representing electors' choices. So I hope that this passes handily, as it has previously when it's come.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Neal.
Thank you.
So it's 10:40. I'm going to ask now for a motion to extend the meeting to finish the agenda. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay. Next on my list is Councillor Chappell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to call the question.
So to do that, you need to put forward a motion to call the question. Is there?
Let's put forward a motion to call the question.
It's fine. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stroud. So it's not debatable. It requires a 2/3 vote to pass. All those in favor? Can you just keep your hands up for a second? Opposed? So the vote is 7-6, so it's not enough for the 2/3 threshold. Councillor Chappell, you have the floor if there's anything else you wanted to say. Otherwise, I only have Councillor Hill left on my speakers list.
Perhaps I'll just ask the clerk to clarify the status of the actual referendum, because it was non-binding.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, can you confirm that, please?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the results of the referendum were non-binding. It didn't hit the 50-50 rule. So what staff were directed to do was initiate the process with respect to a ranked choice election for 2022. And that's where we are right now. Even what's happening at Queen's Park, if that bill does get third reading, it's a second, it just passed second reading at this point. That will then make that the direction null and void. Thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just wanted to say, like, I've always been a little bit ambivalent about ranked ballots. I just haven't been completely sold on the merits of that system yet, although I'm certainly, beginning to lean in that direction. But one thing I am absolutely sold on is the merits of direct democracy. I mean, the previous council to our council made the decision to put this to the people. And I believe that this is the first time, Councillor Kiley could probably correct me, but I think this is the first time that a municipality in Ontario has actually put this to the residents to vote on. And there was a clear majority of the people who voted in favor of it. I think we have an obligation as a subsequent council to follow that direction that was given to us by the people directly. So I will support this motion, despite some reservations that I might have about ranked ballots, because I think there's been a clear message that's been delivered to us by the community, and I think we have to uphold that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to touch on some of the items that were mentioned by previous councillors. One is that the ranked ballot system really it gets rid of any need to strategically vote, because people can support they can rank. This is my first choice, but if that person doesn't win, I would like that second one or third one. So there's a sense for voters that their vote actually does count. And there was also a question about rationale. Our current system, the first past the post system, there's no doubt about it, it favors the two largest parties in our system. And we are seeing right now tonight the challenges and the division that a two-party system leads to. And so a system that is a ranked ballot system really is better designed for multiple parties. And that's a benefit for all of us. When we have different parties around the table, having discussion, having to work together, that leads to better policies for everyone. So that's for the larger discussion about the rationale and what a ranked system means. But the biggest concern I have for, and the need for actually supporting the motion in front of us is that we owe it to the people in Kingston. It's our responsibility. A referendum does matter. If we don't support this and we don't advocate for the people who voted in the referendum, then what are we saying and what will happen next time there is a referendum? So I think it's very, very important that we support this and the voters in our community. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kiley, you have the last word. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I'd say two things really quickly. Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. One, around other municipalities in Canada, my understanding is that Cambridge, Ontario is the only other municipality who has voted in favor of ranked ballots, and they did that through a referendum. So to Councillor Hill's question, I also believe that they didn't vote for it nearly as strongly as we did. The results were more like, I think, 55% to 45% in favor, but again, not as clear of a mandate as we have in Kingston. And they also had a lower voter turnout than we did, so numerically also lower. And the only other thing I would say is I referenced Premier Ford's comments at AMO last year. I also know that AMO last year, Minister Clark was in attendance, obviously, and he was very receptive at many occasions to municipal delegations and also comments from the floor during panel discussions. And I believe, in fact, some legislation that was proposed at that time changed due to the tremendous feedback that he had from municipalities. So again, just to underscore the fact that if we vote in favor of writing him and working with him to see this change, we'll be joining other municipalities that have done that. And hopefully that will be a groundswell enough to see the proposed rescinding of ranked ballots be itself rescinded, and in turn have ranked ballots as a continued legitimate option. So I hope we can all support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll call the vote on new motion number 1. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle opposed. Okay, new motion number 2, moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Neal. Whereas movie theaters are integral to the social, cultural, and economic life of our communities and an outlet for homegrown Canadian cinema, which will be endangered if local cinemas close. Whereas movie theaters employ over 15,000 Canadians, whereas movie theaters also attract customers that multiply the commercial benefit to other businesses. Therefore, be it resolved that the federal government be requested to ensure that the Canada Emergency Rental Subsidy Program includes access to funding for movie theaters, and that the federal government be requested to rework the financial assistance program for theaters that flows through Heritage Canada, so that more theaters are eligible and more funds can flow to those theaters that are in dire need of assistance to cover their fixed costs. And that the provincial government be requested to extend the no eviction rules for at least another 6 months to ensure that when new movies come out in theaters, their lights will still be on. And that a copy of this motion be sent to Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, Provincial Finance Minister Rod Phillips, Federal Leader of the Opposition Aaron O'Toole, Provincial Leader of the Opposition Andrew Horath, MP Mark Gerritsen, MPP Ian Arthur, and MPP Randy Hillier. Councillor Hutchison, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think to get to the nub of this motion is that it's meant to encourage the federal government to close a gap in their emergency funding for small business. Turns out that originally this motion, and you might have noticed this, that the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, CCRA, was in there, but in fact, it turns out that in October 9th, that was is to be phased out. It's still finishing up, and then it will be replaced by the Canada Emergency Rental Subsidy Program, CERS. And the idea is to, the regulations aren't clear at the moment, so the idea here is to encourage the federal government to ensure that this funding will be available to movie theaters just like any other small business. So, and I might note that this is about all movie theaters. We heard about the downtown screening room, and that is important culturally and economically to the downtown. I'm very clear on that because when we had a Cineplex and it closed a few years back, businesses were very concerned because, as it says in the motion, theaters attract people to what they're showing, and those people may go out for dinner, they may go shopping beforehand or after, and that helps other businesses. So there's a multiplier effect going on here. So the other part of this is to get to ease up the availability of funding from Heritage Canada to movie theaters, and then asking the provincial government to extend the no eviction rules for at least 6 months. Now, according to my research, that no eviction law or regulation connected to COVID, it ceased, but it's probably going to be renewed in the next couple of days. Either way, the motion is worded so that we encourage the government to continue on that. So for the social, cultural, and economic reasons that were given quite articulately by the presenters, I think we should support this. And I thank my seconder for being there. He spent many years volunteering for the community theater. So that's all I have to say for the moment. I reserve the right to speak last. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I received a text from somebody suggesting one minor amendment, and if this could be friendly, that's fine, but I think we left off FCM for notification at the very end, if I'm not mistaken. And therefore, if this could be a friendly amendment with the mover, for us to add FCM in the circulation, since some of what we're asking is from the federal government. Would that be satisfactory? I see the mover shaking his head, so.
So we'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you very much. I think this is really important to the core of the city, but to all of the city. This has become an institution in Kingston, and we heard from the delegation and from the owner how important this is to the community, to festivals, to the city as a cultural, as a very important cultural venue. So I think if for no other reason, we've been able to publicize how important it is and how safe it is with the COVID precautions that the theater takes. for us to go to. I've planned to go to 2 movies this week, which will help with that. I also plan, and I would recommend that we buy memberships or cards for family. I've got some stocking stuffer ideas that will help bridge Wendy and the theater to be able to continue to flourish. So I would hope that this could pass unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, we'll call the vote on new motion number 2. Sorry, Councillor Chappelle, you wish to speak? No? But you're in favor. Okay. So we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, Mr. Clerk, ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor Hall and seconded by Councillor Chappelle that the minutes of City Council meeting number 2020-26 held Tuesday, October 20th, 2020 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We have some communications. Is there any other business? Mr. Clerk, cross for bylaws, please.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Stroud that bylaws 1 through 6 and 9 be given their first reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Stroud that clause 11.36 of bylaw number 2010-1 as amended be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaw 1 3 readings.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
And finally, moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Stroud that bylaws 1 through 9 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thanks very much.